Am I audible? Okay. So good evening, friends. I am HIMANSHU Sharma. Many of you know me. Many of you do not. वॉल्यूम बढ़ाना पड़ेगा. ठीक है. अभी ठीक है. How is it now? It is fine. Okay. I have organized this orientation session for the new 500 batch. But basic objective was to know what are the new theories which are there in the market regarding geography. तुम लोग ज़्यादा अच्छा बता सकते हो. So अभी क्या क्या theories चल रहा है with respect to your geography option. Definitely there is one perception. There is one perception that paper was tough. No doubt. Casual look would tell you that it was comparatively tough than last year, but we'll see that perceptions can change if you know the reality. Number of things need to be known. It becomes very clear from if we look into the past few years paper. Almost you will find this trend to be followed since 2009. So we are almost approaching a period where it would be a decade. Since such a change in pattern in geography can be seen, we are definitely what has happened. Geography, like it, you can find this to be true in even other optionals as well. Normally, what has happened, geography is becoming a very, very dynamic subject. It was always dynamic, although the questions which were asked before this, they used to be from more static part of the syllabus. Today what they have done, in 2008 you must be knowing that there was change in syllabus and number of new topics were added, new dynamism was brought into the syllabus. For example, you will find if you compare the syllabus, before 2008 there were no applied topics in physical geography. In 2008 they added applied topics in physical geography, and clearly it was very clear that if you had a casual look into the syllabus, new syllabus, that they were going to make the paper dynamic. And those who knew, they were not disappointed. We have been seeing that since then the paper has become quite dynamic. If you are aware about the dynamism, what are the boundaries of this dynamism, you will find this paper to be comfortable. If you are not aware of the boundaries, clearly what would happen, you will find that same kind of difficulties which is there, which most of the students found. Now, the first question arises: what to do, how to go for the next year, how to attempt for the next year, how we should be preparing. All these various type of questions are there. We will be discussing the paper. In fact, we will see how the paper should have been attempted. If we would have attempted the paper in the manner which I will be talking about, you'll see that paper was quite balanced paper. If you ask my opinion, I would simply say that there was not much difference in the paper from last year, except you will find that there was difficulty which was introduced in the compulsory part compared to the choice type questions. We will see that how the things are different. But very important thing here, the question that is there is, why despite so much time period which has elapsed since this dynamism we are seeing in geography, why students are still not very much prepared? Ideally this 8 years, for example, is a very sufficiently long period of time, and at this point of time ideally what should have happened? We should have adapted with the kind of paper that are coming in the examination. But still what we are finding, we haven't been able to adapt. Number of reasons are there for this. Primary reason, I believe, if you ask me, is that in general, majority of you have done your classes somewhere at particularly popular places. At popular places, actually what happens, there is scarcity of time with the teacher. He has to follow a schedule and he cannot divert too much away from the schedule. So definitely within that short period of time, whatever he is able to deliver, he is able to deliver. Otherwise what happens, he is in general not introducing you to the reality. There is a kind of, you can say, an environment which you are living in. Suddenly when you go into the examination, you find that the real environment is actually very different. And definitely then you feel that UPSC is against geography option. We will see there are some things which clearly show that UPSC has been very demanding with the option, with this option, no doubt about this. Probably because of the fact that majority of the students are choosing geography as an optional. And it would be there because in general majority of the people who are preparing the examination, they are coming from science or engineering background, and they normally find the geography optional subject to be very, very natural to them, and probably this is the reason you will find number of people taking up the optional. So there are a number of things, but I feel that few things have to be understood before we attempt the paper, before we go to write the examination, how we prepare for the examination, all these things. Before that, few things have to be very, very clear. And one thing that needs to be very, very clear is one problem that we are finding today is there is lots of confusion. So if you are appearing for next year, what you have to do is you have to have a very, very clear idea, a very clear plan of how you are going to approach this year preparation and how you will be definitely using that preparation into the examination. For this, clearly when we are talking about this confusion has to be removed, and this confusion clearly would be regarding two aspects. And if we talk about these two aspects, one is regarding the preparation and one is regarding the question paper. Preparation we will be talking about, because throughout this 500 course, what we will be doing is we will be talking about topics, from where to prepare, what are the boundaries of the topics. You already must have studied your optional, and you will come to know that the boundaries which you know might not be the case. Boundaries can be even wider than you know. I'll just give you one example. You might have seen that there was this year question 5A, time geography. You'll find most of the people very much confused why they asked this topic, time geography, and ultimately some would also say out of syllabus पूछ रहा है, फालतू का काम कर रहा है UPSC. But ultimately you will realize that it is not so. And in fact many of my students are also sitting here of the past 500. You'll find that we discussed this topic twice in the class. Once as a part of behavioral geography, then again I asked this in a comprehensive test where I again discussed this topic. And when I was discussing this topic, I also told the students about the reason why I was discussing this topic. क्योंकि मुझे भी थोड़ा डर लगता है ना स्टूडेंट से, क्योंकि क्या पढ़ा रहे हैं सर, ये क्या है टाइम ज्योग्राफी, थोड़ा सा डिफिकल्ट कंसेप्ट है. So I also generally explain why whenever we take up a unique topic, I also explain what is the reason why we are picking up this topic. So basic reason for that was we had already seen a trend, and I think it was 2013 or something when a mental map question was asked. It was I think 2013. So when you study behavioral geography, you will find that various approaches and methodologies are mentioned as a part of behavioral geography. One of the things which is mentioned as a part of behavioral geography is time geography. Now time geography, although it is a very, very wide theme of geography, human geography, but still because it was introduced by Pred to the wider audience, and Fred was a very influential behavioral geographer. As a result of it, you will find that this topic to be mentioned as a part of behavioral geography. So I told the student that why we are doing this, because already what UPSC has done, they have broken behavioral geography into parts. They have asked the sub parts of the topic, and if they have done so in the past, clearly this means what? They can definitely repeat this in future. And that was the reason why we were doing so, why we did time geography in the classes. Many of the students, उसके बाद बहुत मैसेज आया पेपर के बाद कि थैंक्स और बहुत अच्छा लगा पेपर. Ultimately, this also tells me what? If I extrapolate this same phenomena, that clearly shows what? If they have done this for behavioral geography, you tell me, can they do it also for other topics like humanistic? Like for example, if you talk about, they can do it same for your radical geography. So for example, if they are asking in future, write about critical geographies, you should not be surprised, because it is already mentioned as a part of your syllabus. Critical geography was what? Number of branches which diverged from radical geography. They ultimately were referred to as your critical geography. This was basically a post 1990 phenomena. In 1990s it happened. Late 80s it started and 1990s it occurred. So again, this tells us what? UPSC has been giving all these signals all along these years. It is for us to ultimately grasp or get these signals and try to decode what kind of trend, what type of questions can be asked, what are the boundaries in which we have to prepare. In general, for example, I'll give you another example. One thing becomes very clear if you look into the past few years paper, that section A is in general becoming unattemptable. That is one common thing you are finding. Every year you will find that toughest questions are there in section A. Section B is relatively what? It is easier to attempt. And clearly by this time students should be aware, and their strategy should be focused more on what? Clearly the human geography part. And you, if I ask you, you tell me how much of your actual time you spent in studying physical geography compared to human geography. You will find a vast difference. You are so much indulged in, for example, Savinder Singh का एक बहुत किताबें हैं, उन्होंने physical geography की लिखी है. And one theme is कि आप क्या करो कि you study for geomorphology, you study also for climatology, you study another book for oceanography, तो उससे सब हो जाएगा. We will see that there are ways of interpreting the syllabus. If you interpret the syllabus in those ways, it becomes very clear that even section A can be handled with relative ease. Although one thing is very clear that every year it would happen, one or two questions would be there which would be out of box. And this is a trend which has been created by UPSC. In fact, last year जब मैं अपने टेस्ट कंडक्ट कर रहा था, I got many complaints from the student कि सर क्या tough question पूछ लेते हैं आप. And many of these questions used to be the first few questions which were very tough. So I did it on purpose because I have found that UPSC is doing it on purpose. You'll find that initially what happens, they are asking the first question very tough, which they know students do not know. And it is what? It is a way of, it is a method of psychologically testing you. How you are handling the pressure of the examination. If you handle the pressure of the examination well, that means there is a larger possibility you will be doing rest of in your career better, handling of the pressure. So if you talk about this handling of the pressure, like for example this year they asked you about pseudo-volcanics, volcanism. Before this year there was basket of ectopography. If you go further beyond this year, you will find there was one question asked on zonal classification of geomorphic processes. Every year you will find that the first question is very difficult. But if you are just able to cross this barrier which has been created by UPSC, this mental barrier, you will find that there is lots of the paper which is very attemptable, where definitely what you can do, you can definitely score very good marks. And there are so many examples from last year, from 500 batch, from other students of mine. We saw that students just attempting between 220 to 30, even less than that. There were cases where one of my students just attempted 205 marks and still he got 141. And 220 to 30, there were so many who were scoring 140 plus, which clearly shows that if you are writing a good content, then you are easily able to get somewhere around 60% of the marks, even more than that. So that to 20-30 marks, that 2-3 questions which UPSC is asking you, that is just to create what? That mental barrier. And you definitely during the examination have to do what? You have to ultimately go beyond this barrier. Then only you will be able to complete the paper better. We will be exemplificating this today when we look into the paper, how we should have attempted the paper. But for just to do that, we need to understand few things about this confusion. We need to clear this confusion. If we talk about this question paper, you will find that question paper is made up of 3 type of topics, or 3 type of questions are there in this question paper. And if we talk about these 3 type of questions, I have named them. First type is rule. I call them as rule type of questions, because these rule type of questions are those which you were already prepared and they came into the examination directly, and there what would happen, they would help you in saving time. Also your content was ready, so it is very high chance that what would happen, you will be getting very good marks. These are very straightforward questions. Like for example, this time geography this year, for many of my students, it should have been straightforward question. So if you talk about this rule type, it is what? Here you can get marks which are above even 60%. This is this type of questions. Second type of questions are, I call them as tricky questions. Now in these tricky questions, what happens is, depending upon how much we have conceptual understanding, how much we have practiced writing these type of questions, we would be able to score between 40 to again 60% marks. Then there is a third category. I call this category as exceptional questions. And exceptional question, ये luck के ऊपर based होता है. So many times it can happen that you have prepared that topic and it comes into the examination. Many times it would happen you do not know anything about them. So these exceptional type questions, for example, last year for many, basket of vectography they had studied. So that was not exceptional to them. I purposely, in fact, I asked my students to read certain chapters from Savinder Singh in all my geomorphology classes, and I feel because every year, almost every year, they are asking questions from them. So there are some exceptional questions. Now if we look into the past few years paper, if you just leave 2013, which was a kind of exceptional year in terms of difficulty of paper, you will find in almost all the years these 2 categories have dominated the paper. Their weightage is almost always above 80% in terms of number of questions. Exceptional type of questions, they can be between 15 to 20% in terms of number, but good thing is many of them are in choice type. For example, this year if you talk about, there were 3 questions were there. For example, question number 4. So there they asked you about periglacial cycle of Peltier. I know majority of the students were not prepared to write that question. In the same question, luckily what they did, they also asked question number 4C, where they talked about the PAVE theory of environmental management. So again it was what? It was an exceptional type question, but most of these exceptional type of questions are in general part of choice type, which can be eliminated depending upon the scenario. But some can definitely be part of the compulsory type. And this year we found that there were at least 3 such questions which were part of compulsory type, where students can find some difficulty. But so this is the ultimate distribution of the questions that we are finding in the examination. Every year, even if I right now discuss with you last year's paper, we will see that the same ratio would come of the exceptional and these type of questions. Now ultimately it depends upon your this aspect, whether how you are able to do this type of this part of the paper. It is not this which determines your selection. It is this which determines your selection. These are just to divert you from your objective. They would always be there. They would every year you will find these type of questions to be present. They are just to divert you. Where you have to focus on these. These would get you selected. They would give you good marks every year. And we will see, Abhi will be discussing how so many questions were just part of this tricky and rule. You can understand when some years rule type questions dominate, वो paper थोड़ा सा easy हो जाता है and people are very happy, बहुत अच्छा लगता है. Some years what they are doing, they are asking some tricky type questions, and then what happens? Ultimately your score goes down. So this is basically the analysis of the paper. Now if I ask you, doing good in this part is clearly what? It is related with removing confusion here in your preparation. Now one confusion is because we are very much focused on these. तो उनको कहाँ से पढ़े? रोज मेरे पास स्टूडेंट आ जाते हैं, सर किताब का नाम बता दिए, तो मैं भी अब दिखाना पड़ता है ना कि मैंने भी बहुत सारा किताबें पढ़ा है, तो 2-4 लिख के हर रोज दे देता हूँ, ये भी पढ़ो वो भी पढ़ लो. But ultimately what happens? It is not how many books actually you read. It is how much you have consolidated, how many times you are able to recall things in the examination. I'll just take one example. There was one question, discuss the impact of ocean currents on air mass behavior. This question was there. Normally सबने थोड़ा बहुत लिखा होगा इसमें, but again whether you are getting 2 marks, 3 marks, 4 marks or 7 marks, this would be determined by how good you were in this part, how good you were in your fundamentals, how strong your fundamentals were, whether you were able to recognize what was the demand of the question during the examination hall. Again it would depend upon how much consolidated preparation you had done for these kind of topics. So for example, if I had to attempt this question, I would simply say impact on air mass behavior. This was very important keyword for me, and as soon as I see these keywords, one concept which I have studied in my climatology comes to my mind, and definitely that is air mass modification. So clearly the first statement that I would be writing in this answer, I would simply say oceanic currents can lead to both thermodynamic as well as mechanical modification in the air masses. Now you tell me, if the examiner sees this statement, do he need to read beyond what you have written? I don't think, because you have already told the examiner that you have decoded the question and ultimately you have understood what was needed to be written. Then what I have to do? I just have to exemplify. And while exemplification, clearly I can be as more like a geography optional student who very well knows how to write these type of questions. So suppose if I was writing, I would simply do what? I would first talk about the first aspect, that is thermodynamic modifications of the air masses, which is caused as a result of the oceanic current. So clearly I'll write something like that: as air masses move over oceanic currents having contrasting temperature properties, their basal layers acquire the temperature properties and thermodynamic modification follows. Then I just have to do what? I have to give examples. Number of examples can be given. For example, if I talk about, for example, there can be, suppose you take case of Greenland. So in Greenland what is happening? There is creation of CP air masses. Now if these CP air masses they are going in number of direction. If these CP air masses which are coming to south, clearly they would come in contact with what? Can we say they would come in contact with North Atlantic drift? As they are coming in contact with North Atlantic drift, what kind of modification would be followed in these CP kind of air masses? Can we say that they would be converted to CPK, and there is a probability they would acquire moisture, and if there is any uplift provided to these air masses, there can be a chance that they can become U. So ultimately, I can give examples as well. I can give example of other case as well where there is involvement of you can say cold current. So you can give many examples. You have studied about them. You can give example of Canary current. You can give example of Peru current. So there you must have read about this. How the presence of oceanic currents, they are leading to what? They are creating or decreasing the temperature of these air masses, and definitely as a result of that, what happens? There is a desiccating effect that follows. So clearly, if you talk about that, again when I am talking about, I will make a diagram. I will also show what has happened to those air masses. For example, if there was suppose involvement of empty air mass, or there was involvement of CT air mass, what would happen to this air mass? It would become W and S. This kind of scenario would follow. Then, so this is first type of modification. Second type of modification is mechanical modification in the air masses which can be introduced. I was talking in the class, we have done this thermodynamic modification. We discussed this in the 500 class last year, or this 500 class. Also, when we were talking about a phenomena called frontogenesis, we discussed about this dynamic modification in the air masses that can follow. So we found that there were certain areas, particularly two major frontogenesis areas of the northern hemisphere, and these are located where? One is located in the northwest Atlantic, while other is located in the northwest Pacific. So one, for example, you are finding it to be present along the coast of Newfoundland of Canada. So here what is happening? There is Gulf Stream coming from south, there is Labrador current coming from north, and clearly this Gulf Stream is doing what? It is facilitating the convergence of warm and cold air masses. In other words, it is helping in the air masses to reach a convergence zone. And you must have studied about dynamic modification. Dynamic modification is basically what? It is a modification which is caused as air mass enters into a zone of divergence or convergence. So here clearly it is what? It is entering into a zone of convergence. Thus what would happen? You very well know. There would be upliftment which would be taking place along the polar front, and clearly this type of air mass, empty air mass, it would be converted to U type or unstable. So again you can see what I have written. Is it geographical? Was there anything which you did not knew? Most of these things you have already studied. It was all about how logically you are able to use these during the examination. That is what I am talking about when I am talking about this, solving these tricky type of questions. And if you have written it like this, believe me, you will not be getting more than 6-7 marks. Or less than 6-7 marks. So what we are finding is, it ultimately depends upon your preparation. No doubt, I will also try to expand the horizons of my knowledge. I will also deal with these type of questions. I will also try to ensure that in future I am better able to deal with these type of questions. But my primary strategy would not be based upon dealing these questions. My primary strategy would be based upon what? Dealing these type of questions. They were the key. Every year they are the key. They would ultimately determine how many marks you are getting. And there can be again that same thing, whether now you know about this, if you have prepared for this, clearly what would happen, you will feel comfortable in the examination. And for example, I talked with many of my students. So एक आया मेरे पास, बहुत खुश था पेपर के बाद, और खुशी क्या था, he told me कि सर हर टेस्ट लिख रहा था तो मेरे 20-30 नंबर का छूट जाता था, और आज भी मेरा 20-30 नंबर का छूट गया होता, छूटना ही था, और वो 20-30 नंबर का मुझे आता नहीं था. So what I did, I wrote the 220 marks very solid. So again, it is type of attitude. One of my students told me कि सर जैसे ही मैंने देखा क्वेश्चन नंबर 1 was difficult, मैंने उसको तुरंत बंद कर दिया, सीधा मैं सेक्शन बी पे गया. And I started reading the questions of section B. उसको बिल्कुल बाद में मैंने पढ़े the questions of section A. And I found very comfortable because if you look into the analysis I have given, almost all of the questions were more or less discussed in the class. So it was section B was the key. I have always been telling you, every year I am telling you section B is the key. Section B not only helps you in getting good marks in paper 1, it also helps you in getting good marks in paper 2. There is so much applicability of this section B. So if you are good in these theories, if you remember them at will, if you are able to use them at will, then what would happen? It would not only help in paper 1 but also in paper 2. We'll see. So this is preparation. If you talk about, if you ask me, it is all about what? It is all about removing this confusion. In fact, it happens very frequently with my classes that I found that, I in fact find that immediate batch which has attended the class, its performance in the examination is not very good, because in 500 actually what happens, you face number of new realities, and sometimes it can be there that you are unable to cope with those realities. But comparatively what happens, those students which had attended these classes in previous batches, by the time they are writing the examination, they have got matured. That is the reason why I always say the best time to attend this 500 batch is this winter batch, because this is the time period where you do not have the pressure of the examination, where the new things which are coming to you, where if I tell you that you have to do this, you are able to do this because you have time and you do not have that added pressure of the examination immediately. So ultimately it is all about that, removing this confusion in the preparation process. If you are clear about your objective, what you have to do, then I feel this paper would not be very, very tough for you. In fact, if you ask me, as I said, the level of difficulty was almost equal to last year. But because they have created a psychological barrier, this psychological barrier will ultimately make the scores, it can actually lead to reduction in some scores. We'll see. Okay? So that is what this program is all about. What we will be doing, you must be knowing, because I know most of you have come through here from by knowing from your friends. So you must be knowing what we are basically doing in the classes. We discuss lots of questions. I have changed a few things for this year 500 batch. So first let me just tell you about that, then we'll come to the analysis of the paper. So what are the changes that I have introduced in this year 500? There were also some aspects there clear for me. In fact, I also got suggestion from past year students. One of the suggestions was that, because in the classes what sometimes I used to do was, I used to club some topics of paper 2 and paper 1 together. So because of that, what used to happen was, paper 1 we used to talk lots of theories. Because of that, we got lesser time to deal with questions from paper 2. So the number of questions we attempted from paper 2 used to be lesser. So what we are going to do, I have done this year is, you might have seen the schedule, I have clearly separated paper 1 from paper 2. So now there are 5 modules, and in the first 3 modules we are straight away going to deal with paper 1. With the theoretical part, with the conceptual part. Paper 1 strategy is different from strategy of paper 2. Paper 1 strategy is more like a science, whether you know or you do not know. In paper 2 you can definitely use various concepts, you can use several examples, you can use lots of your GS knowledge, you can use several other aspects like drawing diagrams, number of things, and definitely that can help you in increasing your marks. But this does not happen in paper 1. Paper 1 is straight away, it is science. You know or you do not know. And there again what would happen? You can clearly understand. whether your answer matches with the examiner's, what the examiner has a model answer in his mind or clearly not, and depending upon that, accordingly you will be getting the marks. Okay? So that is one change I have introduced in this year 500. So specifically all the topics of paper 2 I have separated. There what we will be doing, they will be solving the questions separately for each of these topics. That is one thing. Second thing, I have also introduced some, we can see that, I can see very well that students are finding more problem in this category of question. So what I will be doing is, I have increased the share of this type of questions more. So even if, for example, last year I was simply asking questions like discuss the application of system analysis in geomorphology. So what I will do, I will just change the language in such a manner that you are tricked. So with that, what would happen, we will be also able to discuss the concept, but also will be able to use the application part, how to solve these tricks which are there in the questions. So this year what we are going to do, we are going to solve more this type of questions. One more thing which I have introduced is, up till last year I was doing one thing in all the tests, modular tests also, I used to ask 8 questions like it happens in the examination. Now because of that, it used to happen that I wanted students to attempt many of the questions which I used to make tricky, but because वो choice में होते थे, so ultimately क्या होता था, they did not used to attempt those type of questions. So this year from what I have done is, in modular tests there would be only 5 questions and all of them would be compulsory, like you have to do in the examination. Only the choice would not be there, so that you are forced to ultimately attempt those questions which are more like the conditions which are there, which we feel can be replicated in the examination. Okay? So these are some changes I have introduced, and more or less if you talk about as new things come to us, we will also do what, we will change ourselves, we will evolve, and so that we are able to deal with the paper in a better manner. Like for example, if you take paper 2 this year, one novelty we found in paper 2 which is very clear, and it is the same thing which I have been saying for so many years. One novelty was, you will find that the issue based or particular scheme based questions, they were explicit this time. There were so many. Up till last year what used to happen, there were only 1 or 2 such. Such type of questions used to be very few. And definitely this means what? Our ability to solve these type of general type of questions and knowledge about the general geographical current affairs should be wide enough to ultimately tackle these type of questions better in paper 2. So definitely what we will be doing in paper 2, when we will be discussing, we will try to incorporate as many such type of questions as we can. In fact, you can understand this is in general trend with what we have been saying for past so many years. Paper 1 is testing your knowledge. Paper 2 is about testing your ability to use that knowledge. So for example, I'll just give you one example. Today, since we have to discuss just paper 1, there was one normal question on GST. Almost everybody would have written that question on GST. Now there were 2 ways of writing this. One, what you have written. Also another aspect was to introduce some geographical aspect while writing that question on, for example, GST. So if I talk about this geographical aspect, normally most of you have written what you read in, for example, Hindu mein ek article aaya tha. We have talked about that. So I would simply say there are 2 aspects. One is the expected scenario that would evolve as a result of GST, and one is an actual scenario that can evolve as a result of GST. There is a fear that some kind of scenario can emerge, and one is there can be more benefit to the developed states compared to the underdeveloped states. Now suppose if I have to write this, I would definitely have used a geographical explanation. and if I remember 500 में कम से कम 10 बार उससे ज़्यादा ही I have used this concept at various places. And we have studied about growth pole theory. All of you have studied about growth pole theory. So in growth pole theory you must have studied about Peru. So Peru talks about basically what? That if in a economy, economic forces are made free, what would happen? Their tendency would be to polarize at some poles which have certain advantages. That is basic crux of growth pole theory. Now, you tell me, if we are removing the interstate barriers, trade barriers, can we say that we are making these economic forces, or we are giving these economic forces greater freedom? What can happen? Can we say that there can be this kind of polarization which can happen in favor of the developed states? It can definitely follow. So again, while writing the same thing, most of you would have written this aspect, but using a geographical concept while writing the same thing, again it would make a huge difference in the marks that you will be getting. So that is what we will be learning in paper 2 basically, when we will be dealing with the paper 2. And as you must be knowing, this is habit of mine, using lots of theories to ultimately write our answers of paper 2. And we will be doing so many such type of questions in paper 2. Okay? So this is the general aspects that would be there in your 500. Again, I would simply say 500 is what? It is divided into 3 stages. First stage is before the sessions, where you are preparing for the sessions. You are just read with the material, and then comes the second stage, where in the sessions we try to iron out the deficiencies that you have with respect to concepts, with respect to knowledge, with respect to application of those concepts. Ultimately, there is tests to ultimately see that how you are doing, how you are able to apply that in more replication of real type of situations. Okay? So that is about the 500 course. I know most of you know about that. So this is what I want to tell you. Also, if you are joining 500, one more thing I would suggest, this first stage that I am talking about, you might have seen, many of you must have come across my optional class notes. So I would suggest that if you can just keep those optional class notes as a reference material, it would be very, very helpful to you. Because it would happen that in 500 you will be coming across number of new ideas, number of new terms and terminologies. So if you just know about those terms and terminologies, it would be better for you, because then you will be able to make a more clear picture, a mental picture would be created. You will be able to use the class in a better manner. And एक अभी फीलिंग ये भी होगा कि अपना क्लास का प्रमोशन कर रहे हैं, ठीक है, वो तो कर ही रहा हूँ, नो डाउट अबाउट दैट. बट बिफोर रिजेक्टिंग व्हाट आई एम सेइंग अबाउट द नोट्स, बिकॉज जनरली क्या है कि मार्केट में नोट्स का रेपुटेशन बहुत खराब हो गया है, कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट्स के नोट्स का, particularly in geography option, because we see that hardly any of the notes are there which are able to deal with the what they are asking in the examination properly. So just before you reject what I am saying, any scientific person, any rational person, किसी चीज को reject करने से पहले what he would do, he would cross check whether what I am saying is correct or not. So before you reject my idea, you must look into why I am saying you to go through my class notes, because you will find them to be very, very comprehensive, written in a much more lucid type of language than you find in books. And definitely many of the topics which you are not aware, even the topics you have studied, the knowledge about those topics would expand. Although same thing would happen in 500, but if you are just trying to glance through them before the classes, it would be very, very helpful for you. to have the advantage of the 500 classes. Okay? So this is the whole program all about. And now let us discuss our paper. But before we discuss the paper, I just want you to ask questions if you have any questions. या केवल पेपर डिस्कशन के लिए आया, इसलिए तो बाद में कर रहा हूँ. Okay. So let us see how I think the paper should have been attempted. We find that there were number of parts in the paper, section A and section B. And if you look into this section A, it was clearly very difficult. If I was suppose in the examination, or as I have taught my students to do in the examination, it was very clear. As you see section A, you should not get worried, because previous experience with UPSC tells us that on an average paper is always balanced. So if there is something tricky, there are also easier parts in the paper. If I had to do what I would simply, in fact I also ask my students to do this, was I always say that you attempt 20 markers and 15 markers first. There is a definite advantage in doing so. And what is this definite advantage? You can understand. It is very natural that initially when we write, we are slow comparatively. As we keep on writing, then our speed increases and we are able to finish the paper. But initially we are slow. If you attempt the compulsory part of questions first, then generally what would happen? You will be spending more time in 10 markers. Normally you will find that marks allotted to you if you have written well are between 40 to 60%. Now if we apply this formula to suppose a 10 mark question, clearly how many marks you will be getting? 4. If you are writing very well, then you will get 6. However, if we allot a bit more time for suppose 20 marker, if you are writing like this, then how many marks you will be getting? It would be kitna hoga? It would be 8 marks, but here it would be how much? It would be 12. Clearly by devoting greater time for 20 marker, what I have done? I have increased the edge. So it is always better to attempt the larger or these type of the questions having more marks. In fact, you would have found this problem. Many students told me that this problem they found in GS this year, where they have introduced a different type of marking scheme. So those who attempted 10 markers first, they found them to be themselves to be in problem. 15 markers were clearly what were to be attempted first, because there you would be definitely getting better marks. And in 10 marker even jaldi se likh diya, diagrams bana diya, केवल skeleton draw कर दिया, then also what would happen? If the content that you have given is correct, it is very high chance that you will easily get 3-4 marks. Okay? So that is the first thing that should have been done. So while I was suppose reading the paper, clearly for me question number 1 was very difficult. पहली बार मैं देख करके confused हो गया, दिमाग के दागे खुल गए. What was happening? So definitely what I will do, I will quickly switch over to other questions. And if we look into the paper, one thing becomes very clear. If they have increased the difficulty of question number 1, what they have done? In general, they have relatively decreased the difficulty level of other questions. Like for example, if you compare this year question number 2 with last year question number 2, you will find a drastic difference. Last year question number 2 was एक slope वाला question था, if you remember, how King used the concepts of Davis, Peng and Wood. It was very difficult. Whatever I discussed with the students, I was sure that nobody would be getting more than 5 marks in that question. This year comparatively, what is the question? Discuss the forces which govern the air movement on the Earth's surface. Now again, whether you have looked into the previous pattern or not, it becomes very clear. Whenever I take a climatology class, first thing I tell students is climatology is not to be prepared according to the topics which are mentioned in the syllabus. Best way to prepare climatology is what? You take a book and you jot down the headings and subheadings, and you make short notes on all the subheadings. So they have asked questions on dew point, they have asked questions on condensation forms, they have asked questions previously on so many such type of questions which are not directly mentioned in our syllabus, but still they have been asking questions. So that means the best way to prepare climatology is what? To follow this approach and prepare short note for each of these small topics, and they are very easy. They are relatively very easy. So for example, if suppose you attempted this question number 2, forces governing air movement on the earth's surface, you very well know there are 4 forces you should be talking about, and the examiner wants to see these keywords and their explanation. One is, you very well know, pressure gradient force, other is the Coriolis force, third is the frictional force. Many of the students have just written 3 forces. Ideally you should be writing about 4 forces, and the fourth force is centrifugal force, which is coming into action if the isobar become curved. So if you have written all these 4 forces, there is very high chance your marks would be either this or above this, which was not the case last year. Then there was one question, knowledge of slope analysis has limited field application. Limited field application in slope management, explain. Again, it was a tricky question. In number of ways this could have been written. When I talked with the students, I found majority of the students have done what? They have talked about the limitations of the theories. How various theories of slope management have their limitations, and thus there are limitations with respect to field application. No doubt this, if you have written this, it would fetch you some marks. But whether you will be getting 20% marks, 30% marks, 40% marks, it would depend upon whether you have always, while writing this, highlighted or hit the keyword. So for example, when I say that, suppose you talk about King or Davis, they do not include the role of structure in their slope analysis, due to which what we find, it has limited practical application, as we find that the slopes found across the world have variability with respect to structure. So again, when you are using this kind of statement, then what you are doing, you are using your knowledge, you are linking your knowledge with what has been asked in the examination. So the way you have written, it would determine whether you will be getting 20% marks or whether you will be getting 40% marks. We in the class, we discussed one topic, and that could have been used as a framework to write this answer, and I was very happy to see that actually 2 students I have talked to, they have used that framework in writing this answer. So we talked about pros and cons of system analysis in geomorphology, and while we were talking about pros and cons of system analysis in geomorphology, we used the framework of slope, and there we talked about that how, for example, if we talk about slopes or system analysis, one type of systems we study, because slope analysis is basically what? It is based upon system analysis. So one type of study, the systems we study is morphological systems, where we are studying the forms of the slope. In general, what we find in all the theories and majority of slope analysis models, they talk only about 4 elements of the slope, and you very well know, one is the summital convexity, free face, this rectilinear slope, and the basal concavity. So 4 parts are there. But ultimately, if we further go into reality, system analysis is doing what? It is trying to simplify the reality. As a result, what would happen? Its practical application would be limited. And this can be proved by the fact that if we talk about, for example, this part of this slope. So what we are doing here, it is a debris slope. Now you tell me, if we talk about this debris slope, should we also not include the size of the sediments which are making this debris? Ultimately, they would control the stability of this slope, the size of these sediments. So definitely when we are doing this slope analysis, are we taking into account the size of these sediments? Clearly not. And definitely it is what? It is a gross generalization whose application in the field would be what? It would be limited. Then we talked about another type of system is process systems. So if we talk about all these theories, the processes they are taking into account, basically these are which type of processes? There are two type of processes. One is the weathering and mass wasting process, and second is the rain wash processes. Again, with respect to processes, what is taking place? There is gross simplification taking place, because there are so many. For example, if I talk about, there is, for example, leaching is a very common type of process. It is a type of chemical weathering which is normally not taken into account. Or other type of processes, for example, bioturbation is another type of very common slope process which is taking place, which is clearly not taken into account. So there are a number of such processes which are making the reality more complex, and thus its field application would be what? It would be limited. Then I could have also, in fact in the class we talked about structure. All these theories, if you talk about, or analysis, in general what they do, they are taking into account the structure, they are not taking into account. In fact, they presume, if you talk about the three theories, major theories that you are studying, they presume their theory is only applicable for which type of slopes? The slopes having rocky structure. Other type of slopes they are not talking about. Okay? So in general what they are doing, the variability of the structure is neglected. Again what we find, there is gross simplification. As a result, what would happen with the field application? It would be very limited. So again, depending upon what we did in the class, I can find, abhi tak I have talked to some 30 students, and out of that I found 2 who were able to replicate that in the examination hall. That is what we have to do. Using what we already have to solve all these type of tricky questions in a sufficient manner, because always scenario would be, there would be rule type of questions where we will be scoring very high marks. There will be some questions which would be tricky, where our objective is to maximize our marks, and there would be questions, exceptional questions, where what would happen? It can happen we might not be knowing about them. We should not be worried about them. Okay? So that was your question number 2B, and then there was very simple question, Pacific, I think, configuration of the Pacific Ocean floor. So it is a very straightforward question, rule type of question. If you have read about this, there is very high chance you will be getting 60% and above in this type of question. So clearly if you compare, last year क्या था? Question number 2 में एक वो slope वाला question था, which was a 20 marker, जहाँ पे 5 नंबर से ज़्यादा किसी को नहीं मिले होंगे. Then another question was compare the tropical and temperate cyclone. उसमें भी लोगों ने बहुत गड़बड़ी की. And what was the mistake people did? Question was asking about compare the origin and weather condition of temperate and tropical cyclone. और लोगों ने जब देखा comparison between tropical and temperate cyclone, जो सीधे पढ़ते हैं उसको जाकर के उगल के चले आए. They did not actually answer the question. So I am sure majority of people would have got comparatively lesser marks in that question also, because you had to specifically write about how origin is different and how the weather conditions are different. Then third question was, the question was, I think, give a recent account of variability of impact of global warming found on the earth's surface from place to place. Again, that was what? It was a very tricky question. There you had to do regional analysis. You had to talk about how from continent to continent the impact of global warming would be variable. And very few were able to do that. Question number 2 this year was easier, very easy compared to last year. So if I was a guidance student, definitely for me, question number 2 was one of the questions which I should have attempted. it was one area where I could have definitely made an edge. Then coming to question number 3. First question, climate change is reality, explained with suitable examples. You can understand it was very easy question. Basically in the first part what you had to do, you had to just mention about the climate change and its cause. And while you were talking about cause, if you could have used the, for example, the evidences which have been given by IPCC with respect to, for example, carbon, increase of carbon concentration, all those things would have definitely helped. In the later part, in the next part of your answer, you should have given lots of example. For example, it was in news, number of things could have been talked about. For example, it was in news that there were so many tropical cyclones or hurricanes which were formed in the Caribbean Sea and Gulf of Mexico region. It was very recent, so you should have remembered, you could have talked about that. So many other events you could have definitely talked about. So compared to last year, एक क्लाइमेट चेंज का क्वेश्चन नंबर 3 एक क्वेश्चन था जिसमें कौन सा कंपोनेंट्स पूछा था, स्कीम वाज आस्क्ड, ठीक है, विच वाज वेरी कंटेम्पररी. Nobody actually knew about that because it was very contemporary. This year what we are finding, much easier 20 marker. As you go beyond this, question number 3b, distinguish between the characteristic of Chernozem and Xerozem soil. Again, yeah, it was just a trick was there that you should be knowing about the Marbert classification. And in Marbert classification, Xerozem is nothing but desert soils. So if you just knew that it was a desert soil, you will be able to, you can understand. It was a 15 marker. I call this type of question as a rule. It was one such type of question where you could have scored again above 60% marks. Then if you talk about question number 3c, give a classification of plants based on amount of water requirement. This question इस बार भी मैंने करवाया. Even when we were discussing one question on कौन सा था? Discuss the role of environmental factors in the distribution of plants and animals. So whenever I discuss, I always discuss this question because I know that they can break sub parts. It is a very large topic and they can break sub parts and they can ask questions. So while we were discussing in the class, we talked about how this water is impacting, and there can be 3 types of such plants. Classification if you talk about, one is definitely the xerophytes, one is the mesophytes, and clearly if you talk about other is it is hygrophyte. Hygrophytes. So normally ये तो ecology में भी पढ़ते होगे, GS as a part of GS, ठीक है, but definitely you will find this in my class notes. Class notes में मैंने करवा रखा था. And one thing, that is the one of the reasons I always suggest my students to go through the class notes, because all these things you will be finding very discussed in good detail in the class notes. So suppose I was writing this question, I would again use some concepts which we had learnt in the class. For example, we will be using about, in general, can we say, एक diagram ही बना के दिखा दूंगा. Can I say that this is the growth of vegetation or survival of vegetation, and this is water availability. So can I say that there would be areas where the water availability would be what? Can be low, moderate and high, even if I do not want to use the numbers, because actually the numbers would vary from place to place depending upon evapotranspiration. So I can definitely talk about what would happen, where these low type of vegetation would be lying. It would be in these areas where low to moderate type of water availability is found. There will be finding the xerophytes. They would, in general, will find they would have largest range of tolerance. We studied about the concept. We'll again be doing that in 500, range of tolerance. So again we will be finding them comparatively. What we will be finding in the moderate to high scenario, there would be the range for this type, the mesophytes, which have moderate requirement for water, but they can also survive in areas where lots of precipitation is taking place. Clearly, if you talk about areas which are lying beyond this high, which are always covered with water, clearly in these areas what we'll be finding, there would be hygrofites. Okay? So I could have used similar जो हमने class में पढ़ा था. Depending upon those concepts, I could have tried to introduce some novelty, which was definitely helpful. Then इसी के बारे में लिखना था. Xerophytes क्लास में मैंने बताया था, there can be various type of xerophytes. So xerophyte की characteristics you could have talked about. If you remember, we talked in the class succulents, phreatophytes. There are number of characteristics are there. Beside, if you talk about, there are variety of these xerophytes. For example, one type of xerophyte is what? Tropophyte, which is deciduous type of vegetation, which is behaving as xerophyte in one season, while it is behaving as a mesophyte in other season. Or we gave the example of sclerophyllous vegetation, which was, if you remember, Mediterranean vegetation. It is again what? A variety of xerophyte. Then if you remember, we talked about helotrophic vegetation or helophytes. So helophytes, we said that because they are present in salty water, so presence of salt makes the plants too difficult to absorb water. Thus they are facing what? They are facing physiological drought. So again they are what? They are variety of xerophytes. So all these things, they are very simple. They are like rule that if you would have written, you would have got very good marks. So again, question number 3, only trick in question number 3 was this xerosem term, which I did not use in the class. So I accept that this was the term which I did not use in the class. ठीक है? So अगर मुझे choose करना होगा in the examination, I would have definitely attempted whether either question number 2 or question number 3. Both of these were very remunerative type of questions. और उसको अगर इस तरह से लिखा, you will be definitely getting very good marks. Now, because I have to complete the first type of questions, that is your long questions first. So then I have to make a choice from section B. Question number 4 तो देखते ही सबसे पहले. That is the choice UPSC has given us. Why not utilize that choice? फालतू में उसमें क्यों उलझना? It would always be there. UPSC made this easier for you this year. Last year you will find there was one unattemptable question in every 2, 3 and 4. This year what they have done? They have clubbed all those unattemptable question in question number 4. So it was actually they were making your task easier because they knew that question number 1 was difficult for you. So elsewhere they have reduced the difficulty level. Then, so I have to choose from section B. Section B में there were number of questions. If I was suppose a guidance student, we had done question number 8 all the questions very thoroughly. And जितनों से भी बात किया सबने question number 8 attempt किया है. I was happy to see. So question number 8 was heartland theory is gaining importance once again. It was a 20 marker, which was very good thing for us because we did this class in the class very well with lots of contemporary ideas that are there with regard to this heartland theory. So in fact, if you remember in the class we talked about new grade game, we talked about new grade game, how the applicability of heartland theory can be there. So देखो, whenever you have to apply a model, models you know they are representation of quantitative revolution. Quantitative revolution was based on some positivistic type of ideas which neglected the role of human beings. So they represent an ideal case scenario which rarely exists in reality. So whenever you have to talk about application of models, this I talked in the class, I talk in every model's application like this, you have to do application in 2 parts. One, application of all the tenets of the theory in totality. Second is application of the concepts, useful concepts of the heartland theory or any model. So if we talk about heartland application of heartland theory in totality, can we say it is not applicable today? It is definitely not applicable today. There were signs in late 90s and early 2000 where there was economic revival of Russia which was seen, and this was coupled by presence of strong leadership of Putin, first phase Putin. and definitely it gave an impression that Russia can again regain its significance that was envisaged in the heartland theory. But you very well know this phenomena was short-lived. This economic revival was associated with oil prices, oil and gas prices. Clearly what we find with the oil and gas prices, they are crashing. As a result, you will find economically Russia is today what? It is in a crisis type of situation. Russia hasn't been able to diversify its economic production. As a result, it is continuously facing this problem. So despite the few highlighted phenomena like what was happening in Syria, a more activism of Russia as a result of coming back of Putin, we can clearly say that Russia is not going to gain its significance which is envisaged in the heartland theory, or which is ultimately implied in the heartland theory. In fact, China has replaced Russia as the second pole. If there is another pole which is going to emerge, it would not be Russia, it would be China. So in totality what we find, the theory is clearly not applicable. So this should have been my first part. Second part is the application of the concepts, useful concepts of the theory. We find that clearly there is large application. Two concepts were there in the theory. One concept was there would be dominance of land-based forces. What we find, again this concept is not useful today. We have gone beyond land-based forces. In fact, it is the air force dominated forces which are very, very important. So again that concept is not applicable. But if you talk about very important concept given in heartland theory, it is the concept of the pivot. So concept of pivot is basically what? Pivot is a prized asset for which it is the prize for which it is a trophy for which the world powers are fighting with each other. In heartland theory, this trophy was Russia, which was impregnable as it was surrounded by so many difficulties. Later on what happened, you can understand, a new great game emerged, and this was recognized by Spikeman, and he shifted the pivot from heartland to rimland. It was the same concept which was used by rimland. He shifted the pivot to rimland. We find that even today this shifting of pivot continues to occur. For example, one area which is becoming a type of pivot is the China Sea, the region of China Sea. And in the class we talked about how so much of trade etc. is passing through this region. In fact, जो material दिया था उसमें एक diagram भी बना हुआ था about the flow of this trade which was taking place through China Sea. So again, this area is what? It is very significant. Also because China is expected to emerge as the second pole. So you could have talked about this in the second part. In fact, what we did in the class, you could have also talked about other things. For example, we extended in the class application of heartland. So we said if we just make some tweaks in the heartland theory. In the heartland theory, it was talking only about geographical pivot, or it was applying the theory in only geographical space. But if we just move beyond geographical space, there is immense application of the theory. So if we apply the theory in economic space, again we find that there is a pivot for which fight is taking place, and this pivot is the dominant currency. So dominant currency today is what? It is dollar. What we find, Russia and US are fighting among each other for this domination. You will find China is encouraging trade, bilateral trade in its own currency, that is Yuan. There are a number of evidences like import of gold from China has increased. All these evidences suggest that China is preparing for that currency war with US in future. So again, a new pivot in economic space is emerging. If we further extend this concept in cyberspace, for example, what would happen? Again we find the same pivot is the internet control, for control of which what is happening? Lots of fight is going on. Today this control is again in US hand, but you know, lots of cyber threats they are emerging, and from where they are emerging? Many of them are coming from China. So again, there is a war going on for this control of internet. So again, what we can see, we can conclude that although in totality the theory is not very useful, but many of the concepts propounded by the theory have immense application to understand the geopolitics of today. And all these things we did in the classes. So definitely many of the students have been able to replicate. I hope they would be getting very, very good marks. Question number 8b was there, where examine the role of small towns in the regional development process. So if you talk about this, small town was asked. We did in the class, one question was discuss the role of medium towns in the regional development in India. And you know, 2 questions were asked. One was in paper 1, the same question, and then again this question was asked in paper 2 as well. So while we discussed about these medium towns, we talked about the hierarchy, the different types of qualitative terms which are used to describe this hierarchy. So while describing this hierarchy, we talked about very large, medium, small, various type of terms, various type of towns. Now, definitely when we were discussing this question, we talked about how to tackle such type of questions. What type of theoretical frameworks to use. So one very common type of theoretical framework, particularly because this question was in paper 1, I would definitely have used the concept of central place theory. So suppose I was writing about the significance of the small towns. Definitely I would say what? Small towns are, or according to, can I say according to your Christoller, small towns are lower level central places which are providing which type of function? Lower order functions. For example, they very commonly provide marketing functions. Okay? So that I will be explaining. They are serving their complementary area, which is basically what? In general, which is rural in character, which is lying below in the hierarchy. So this part I would have definitely explained as the first part in my answer. Once I have explained this part, second part in the class we did, if we discuss from the perspective of particularly developing world, there are number of new things which are emerging. And in developing world, one concept we used in the class was that normally the migration process is stepped, as you must have studied in the theories. But in the developing world, what we are finding, intervening opportunities are missing in the medium towns, in the small towns. As a result of it, what we find, majority of migration is going where? To the topmost towns of the hierarchy. And this is creating immense number of problems. So definitely to solve this, what we need to do? We need to ensure that there are intervening opportunities. And one place where we can create these intervening opportunities are the small towns. So these small towns would help in what? Correcting this problem. Can we say they would be able to help us in achieving a more balanced and sustainable urbanization? Definitely they would do. In fact, I could have used the third concept which we used in the class with respect to medium towns, and that was, we talked about R.P. Misra model of growth foci. So he is talking about creation of not growth poles but growth foci at number of hierarchical levels. So one hierarchical level he is talking about is service centers. These service centers are what? These service centers are definitely the small towns. So what these service centers would be doing? They are not only providing the marketing functions as was envisaged by Christoller, because Christoller's theory was made in industrial setting. They would also be doing what? They would also be providing several other functions. Like in rural areas, several social services are required. These would be the areas where those social services centers would be located. So for example, if you talk about some kind of colleges can be located, some small hospitals, various type of social services can be provided. Also, because India is basically what? It is agrarian in nature, and to develop agriculture, very important aspect is what? Diffusion of innovation. So these Small towns would be also what? These would be the places or the centers for this diffusion of information and innovation to develop the agriculture in these or economic development in these areas. So again what? Same concepts which we talked with respect to medium towns, they could have been, the same kind of theories could have been used to tackle this question on small towns. And you tell me, if you write it like this, normally what would happen? Examiner would be definitely very much happy that you are able to apply what you have learned. So this was another very good question. Question number 8C, examine the concept of social capital in relation to India. So again, we discussed this question with respect to application in population policy of India, how it would help in achievement of population objectives of population policy. But the two concepts, they were most important. If you understood those two concepts, you will be able to apply them. So if you have learned about social capital, you must be knowing social capital is basically what? It is the interactions or the relations that arise between people and societies. That is basically the social capital, because there is a chance that they can be fruitful in the future. Capital is what? You create it now, its advantages are reaped in future. So they can definitely behave as social capital. We talked in the class that social capital can be of two types. One is bonding capital and other is bridging capital. So bonding capital, people living in an area, relations are growing among them. This is what? This is a bonding capital. Different area or different society, there is a bridge. This is what? A bridging capital. There is someone who is providing a link. So clearly what I will do, while I am writing this, first in the introduction part, I will talk about this conceptual aspect of social capital. Then I will say how it is helpful in India. And clearly you can understand, social capital, if we talk about in India, it exists as a result of historical processes. What we have done, we also have created in it recent times many type of social capitals. So for example, if I have to give example of historical processes, can I say caste groups? They are what? They are examples of bonding capital. Religious groups, they are what? They are example of bonding capital. Okay? So various type of such type of groups, they are basically what? They are example of bonding capital, and we have been using them to our advantage. For example, if there is a social tension between religious communities, government does what? It uses bridging capital, the leaders of these communities, to bridge this gap, thus ultimately creating what? The bridging capital to ensure that such tensions are not there, they are controlled. So that is basically what? That is the concept of social capital. Historically these things have existed. We have failed to achieve such bridging capital in case of, for example, tribal regions. Their bonding capitals exist. That is why these people are isolated from rest of the population. But we have failed to create those bridging capital, those bridges. And thus what we are doing, we haven't been able to successfully deal with this problem. So we can give examples, lot of example of the social capital which is already existing. But clearly what we have done, we have tried to create social capitals after independence. One such social capital we have tried to create is Gram Sabha. Gram Sabha is basically what? It is an example of bonding capital. There we are also creating bridging capital. For example, the leader, elected representative, it is also part of Panchayat Samiti. So in Panchayat Samiti, what is happening? That bridging between different Gram Sabhas is taking place. So that is an example of what? It is an example of social capital. Other type of social capitals we have tried to create. For example, if you talk about cooperatives, Amul cooperative, you know, it is located at various hierarchies. We studied in White Revolution. So again, if you talk about these cooperatives, they are basically what? They are bonding capital. Their functionaries, they have role to play as bridging capital. Then you can take other examples. Today, government is actively involved in creation of self-help groups. So these concept of self-help group is basically what? It is an example of bonding capital. Okay? So definitely I could have given several such type of examples where I could have proved that this concept is very, very helpful for the Indian case, and in fact government recognizes this. Government has been using this concept of the social capital. Okay? So again, question number 8 was one such question which was relatively very, very easy, and this was question where you would have got very good marks. Same thing if you talk about question number 7. So this was discussed the applicability of central place theory. Same principle in applicability. First, full application of the total theory. Second is application of the concepts of the theory. So clearly when we talk about the first part, application of the theory in totality, you can understand one thing, it is based upon what? Simplifying assumptions. Also it was made from the perspective of what? South Germany or Germany. Clearly that means what we'll be finding, when we apply it to other areas there would be limitations in application. This would be the first part. You'll say we did in the class application of central place theory in India. At this point of time, once you have written this, what you will do, you will use that information as a case study with respect to India. And what we said, in India we found that it was only applicable with respect to administrative principle. It was, and even at only the hierarchy of which district and tehsil, at that hierarchy we found it was applicable. In transport principle it was not applicable. We found that there was some applicability with respect to marketing principle. So again we could have used that as case study. So that would have dealt with the first part where we are talking about total application of the theory and where there are limitations. But then what would happen? We also have to talk about the concepts. Clearly the hierarchy, the urban hierarchy concept, the functionality concept that has been discussed by Christoller, it has its huge application in the planning process. So you can understand, for example, can we say that Christoller's theory, अभी हमने small towns का जब बात कर रहे थे, what we were doing, we were applying the concepts of hierarchy that have been used by Christoller. So again, it would be very helpful in identifying such central places which can provide that growth momentum. In fact, very frequently what we do while choosing the growth poles are superimposed upon existing framework of the central places which are already existing in an area. So definitely you can talk about that. Okay? So second part mein what you can do, you can explain the practical applications. How practically, for example, can we say if we recognize a city in which hierarchy it is located, can we say we would be able to ascertain what kind of pull it would have, and can we say that we will be able to ascertain what would be the future pattern of flows in the city, whether with respect to, if you talk about population or migration, or whether with respect to commodities or capital. Definitely we can get an idea about what future patterns would emerge. So first part, total application in totality, we will always find problems. Second part, application of the concepts, and definitely we will find that several concepts can be applicable. Okay? So that was 7A. Question number 7B, again it was very, very easy type of question. We discussed this in the class, and not directly but indirectly through two questions. One thing, in fact we discussed so much on demographic transition theory. कम से कम हमने 5-6 क्वेश्चन डिस्कस किए होंगे on demographic transition. So demographic transition theory, first thing इसको क्वेश्चन को पढ़ते ही there are considerable demographic similarities between West European nations and Japan. तो पहला चीज तो मेरे दिमाग में तुरंत आ जाएगा, and that if I write as an introduction it would be very, very good. I would say both West Europe as well as Japan are or have reached the 5th stage of demographic transition, and it is very clear, 5th stage of demographic transition. So once you have talked about this, you can explain this phenomena We can definitely say, for example, अगर मैं explain कर रहा था, I would have, in fact, in the class also I linked these two theories. So, if I was explaining, can I say that it is result of, because both of these have reached the age of high mass consumption, according to which theory? It is the Rostov's theory. So definitely I can link why they have reached the fifth stage of ultimately the demographic transition. Once you have linked that, then what you will do? You have to basically talk about the similarities. Talking about that similarity is the most important part of the question. Okay? So demographic similarity, again, one type of demographic similarity would be what? You can draw the age pyramid. That is one thing you will be doing. You will be talking about the problem of old age population that these are facing. Okay? Another similarities would be there. They would be following similar type of population policy. Migration, they would try to increase the component of migration in their population. Okay? Also what we will be finding, where other type of demographic aspects, whether you talk about PFR, whether you talk about literacy rates, all those would be what? They would be much better. Mortalities would be what? They would be very much reduced. So all these I could have talked about. But if I am talking in the initially only, if I say that, because all these things would be found because both of them have reached the fifth stage of demographic transition. You tell me, doesn't it gives an impression to the examiner that your conceptual clarity is very good? You are able to relate what you are writing. You are not just mugging up. You are also understanding and writing. Okay? That is basically what we have to do, and should have been done in this question. Question number 7C. This was one question I did not directly discuss in the class. So again, एक problem हो सकता था, but इसका background I have told you in the class when we discussed about the development and its measurement. So all the development type of questions we were doing in the class, we were linking them with welfare geography. So suppose I was writing this, I would have definitely said in the initial part only that the welfare approach, or one of the key question in the welfare approach, is identifying the pattern of development or level of development. What is the meaningful definition of development? Initially development meant what? If you remember, we talked about the phase where it was economic growth phase, where development only meant economic growth. But soon, as a result of this, what happened? There was criticism and critical phase emerged, and ultimately as a result of that, what would happen? We would enter into a scenario where more humanistic principles emerged. So more humanistic elements were also included as a part of the development process. Okay? So you could have definitely linked it with that. Then you could have talked about what would be the aspect. One thing which is definitely initially it was calculated as a physical quality of life index, which ultimately evolved into HDI, which ultimately has further different type of evolutions, which we talked in the class. It's number of type of methods which have emerged. Today we are talking about happiness index. Today we are talking about freedom index. So all these are trying to measure what? They are definitely trying to measure the quality of life. So definitely you could have used that to talk about this answer. So sufficiently good answer could have been written. And see now, the questions up till now we have discussed, out of those 4, 3 you could have easily attempted. And you tell me, compare these questions with last year questions. We really find that they were easy compared to last year. So this was the area where you should not have panicked, and this was the area where you should have made an edge. Then we move on. Next thing what I will do, I will definitely चल रहा पीछे वाले जगन वो पीछे वाले ऐसे okay. So once I have done this, next thing what I'll do, I'll move on to the short notes. And again short notes, section B के short note ज़्यादा easy थे. They were what we did in the class. So definitely what was there? They were attemptable, all of them. So first thing what I'll do, I will be writing them. So question number 5, concept of time geography. We discussed in the class. Time geography was basically what? You will straight away start writing. There is so much to write in this concept of time geography. So we will find that if we talk about this concept of time geography, it first thing मैं शुरू से ही लिखना शुरू कर दूंगा. Concept of time geography was given by whom? We talked about Hagerstrand. So Hagerstrand in 1960s. Although it was introduced to the wider audience by Pred in 1970s. So from there you start writing about what this time geography is all about. So according to Hagerstrand, he said that time and spaces are what? They are like resources. And these resources are what? They are constraining the activity of human beings in space. So there are various type of constraints they produce. As a result, the human activity and mobility in the space is constrained. So books में देखा होगा तो you might have seen that diagram is made. This kind of diagram about. So on this there is place, or here it is time. Here it is time. So you can understand, someone is born, his mobility is less, so he would be staying at the same place. But what would happen? As his mobility increases, all his paths, life paths, can be traced in this prism of time and space. Ultimately, as he reaches old age, what would happen? Definitely his mobility would decline, and there would be a chance he would be living in the same area or the place. So he talked about various type of constraints. Later on in 500 we'll be talking about all this. 3 type of constraints he talked about, which are ultimately limiting the movement of the people or the paths and the interactions which occur. So if you remember, we talked about various other things, like ultimately for others, time geography was what? It was just a criticism of quantitative revolution. But if you talk about for Hagerstrand, it was much more. It was an approach to ultimately visualize all geographical phenomena. So all geographical phenomena, what he did, if you remember, we talked about concepts of paths. So there are what? There are paths or patterns, geographical patterns, which are prevalent in the space. As 2 paths interact at one point, what is created? Situations are created. These situations and paths have what? They have always goals and objectives. So there is what? There is this geographical pattern which is visible. Visible geographical phenomena. Below these visible geographical phenomena, what is present? There is goals and objectives. And if you talk about this kind of situations which are created, always they would be created where? कहीं ना कहीं geographical space में तो होंगे. So these are located in geographical space. So ultimately what would happen? He said that traditionally in geography, landscape term has been used. He did not prefer landscape term because he found that it was more mechanistic. So he used a term जो हमने क्लास में देखा था, it was diorama, which was people living in an area with feelings. So we said, as we said in the class, in a way, can we say this diorama is the origin of the concept of place, as we find in case of humanistic geography. Place की बात करते हैं humanistic geography में. So again we find what? It has derived its inspiration in some manner from this concept of diorama. People living in place with their feelings, not as mechanistic human beings as was envisaged by quantitative revolution. Okay? So again all these concepts if you have written, marks मिलेगा. If you haven't written, it is a type of exceptional type of question. अगर नहीं पढ़ा है तो marks नहीं मिलेगा. this is what had to be written. That is the reason you will understand that either you will be getting good marks or you will be getting 0. There is also a chance you can get 0 in this. Question number 5b. Whittle says agricultural regions are relevant even today. बहुत easy question. We discussed in the class about Whittle says, the basis of Whittle says classification. You could have used that same thing to write this answer. First thing what I will do, I will divide my answer in 3 parts. In the introduction, I will mention what? I will mention the basis of classification and the principle that he has used. I would say that these principles are what? They are still relevant today in the second part. And while I am saying this in the second part, what I will do? I will exemplify what I am saying. So can I exemplify with, for example, taking some examples? So can I take the example of US? And can I say that agricultural patterns in the US can be studied from the perspective of what is talked about by Whittle say? So for example, I will correlate many areas of Whittle say with the agricultural regions which are found in US. So for example, there is a prairie belt. In prairie belt, can I say the features are very similar to extensive type of agriculture regions talked by Whittle say. Then there is a dairying belt. Again, what we are finding, features are very similar to what has been talked by Whittle say. Okay? So what I have to do, I will be taking examples and proving that Whittle says classification is what? It is still useful. I can take other examples from developing world as well. Particularly, can I take some examples of tribal societies where the influence of information reach is lesser and still we are finding they are still living in very primitive type of conditions which have been again described by Whittle say. I can do so, definitely I can do so. Other aspects, developing country के भी example ले सकता हूँ. For example, if I take for example case of Bihar of India, can I say it has very high similarities with the subsistence agriculture with rice dominance which has been talked by Whittle say. This is one region which has been talked by Whittle say. Again we can find lots of application of the concepts of Whittle say. So first, second part what I will do, I will talk about how it is applicable. Then I will move to third part. और इस third part के बारे में so many questions we have done in the class. We talked about how in developing countries there is agriculture is found to be in transition phase. Agriculture was what? It has traditional characteristics. But all the developing countries, what they are trying to do? They are trying to convert their traditional agricultural practices into commercial agricultural practices. As a result, what you will be finding? In these countries, the agriculture is found to be in transition phase. Now, it has added a number of characteristics. As a result, what we find? When we apply them in the theory of or this regionalization, which has been talked by Whittle say, what we find? We find that applicability is less. Whittle say classification is very rigid. There are no regions where they can be put. Very good example is case of China. So you could have described the case of China. In fact, in the class also we did. So China की अगर हम बात करें, you can understand China is traditionally classified as which type of agricultural region? Intensive cultivation with rice dominance. Today what we find, however, China with, we find that it is meant for market. Intensive cultivation वाले areas में it is mainly meant for what? Self consumption. It is not no more case in case of China. There also what we are finding, there is lots of use of machine implements. Again there is what? Corporatization of agriculture which has taken place in China. Do you find any category in Whittle say's classification to put China in? We do not find. So again what we are seeing, that no doubt there are some applicabilities, particularly however with respect to the developing world agriculture. Many shortcomings have emerged because mainly they are found in the transition phase. So again, it was all about combining. मैंने कुछ भी ऐसा बोला which you did not know. You all knew this thing if you have studied this concept. Then write an explanatory note on geographical system. इतना आसान क्वेश्चन है. Only thing was system analysis. Normally हम word use करते हैं. Here it was writing geographical system. So अगर मुझे लिखना होता I would have simply said in introduction में कह दिया होता geographical reality is highly complex. To simplify this reality, geographers use the tool of geographical systems. So you write this and then you start move forward and describe what is a system. Geographical system. So geographical system, can we say it is a open system, it is a natural system? Open system का concept सभी ने पढ़ा है, ठीक है? That is all those things basically you have to write. Always what we will be finding, it is open system, that means one aspect of geographical system would be what? Always it would be environment, one component of geographical system, it would always be environment, it would always have linkage with the environment. So you basically had to describe open systems. But we can also say that for geographical analysis, geographers have done what? They have also used closed geographical systems artificially. For example, you very well know von Thunen ने क्या किया? When he is talking about an isolated estate, he is talking about what? A closed geographical system. Although it is hypothetical, but still he is talking about a closed geographical system. So you could have also talked about that aspect. So it was very easy question, could have fetched you very good marks. Question number 5D, traditional cultural identities are at loss with the growth of global connectivity. Explain. दो क्वेश्चन हमने क्लास में किए थे. One was what is cultural diffusion, its mode as well as barriers to it. Another question we discussed which was almost same, ये टेस्ट में मैंने पूछा था. Discuss the impact of migration and transnationalism in transformation of religion and culture in a globalizing age. Same question almost. So again यहाँ पर देखो मार्क्स किस पार्ट पे मिलेंगे. You will be number of people would be writing number of concepts, ठीक है. Whether you have used geographical concepts or not, that would determine whether you are getting 40% or whether you are getting 60% of marks. So several examples हमने क्लास में भी लिए थे. For example, can I say that with globalization or with global increase in global connectivity, can we say that the process of cultural diffusion has increased? जब हमने क्लास में बात किया था, we talked about that cultural diffusion can occur in many ways. It can be in the form of expansion diffusion. It can be in the form of relocation diffusion. So expansion diffusion can be contagious when you are coming in contact with some person. It can be hierarchical when it is introduced by the leaders of the society. Relocation is when people themselves are moving. So बहुत सारे example दे करके I could have explained using these terms and terminologies. So for example, one example हमने क्लास में लिया था about loss of language in the central Indian tribal belt, which was getting increasingly assimilated in the Hindi belt. For example, if you talk about, very good example is of Santali. So Santali, what we are finding is they have almost totally lost their original language. They are more they are Hindi speakers totally now. And clearly when I am writing this example, can I say it is result of the phenomena of contagious diffusion? There is no doubt about that, as they are coming in contact with the main population of India, Hindi speaking belt. What happens? They are learning this language. They feel that this language learning is very important for getting the jobs. So as they are coming in contact, they are definitely learning this language. So I will use, while I am giving this example, I will use the term, I will say it is result of the phenomena of contagious diffusion. Another examples I could have given, for example,
secularization in use.
We are coming to that. Then another examples we could have used. One example is, today in India we find, and other places also, there is increasing spread of HIV seeds. As a result of this spread, what we can say? Can we say that the traditional varieties of seeds, they are getting lost? It is an example of which type of diffusion? Can we say it is promoted today by the government and institutions? Thus, can we say it is an example of hierarchical diffusion process? So, definitely we could have given an example. We could have given other examples of contagious expansion diffusions. For example, one very common phenomena is urbanization phenomena. Very common phenomena is internet, more information achieved. As a result of that, we are finding that secularization is one dominant phenomena which is taking place in the world, where what we are finding that the traditional religions influence is reducing, and definitely it is a result of what? It is mixture of all these type of processes, diffusion processes. Other examples also could have been given. For example, if you talk about one type of example can be relocation diffusion. For example, if missionaries are going in tribal areas of Africa or India and they are introducing Christianity, can we say that the animist cultures that were prevalent in these areas are being lost? And it is an example of what? It is an example of relocation diffusion, which is or missionary activity which is promoting this type of further expansion diffusion. So, using these geographical terms and terminology, you must be knowing whenever we talk about cultural topics, the most important geographical concept that we use, it is phenomena of cultural diffusion. All the, whether you talk about language, whether you talk about religion, all these are explained with respect to this phenomena of cultural diffusion. So if you have used this concept, if you have written it like this, it is very high chance you can get 60% of marks. As you go on, give an account of sustainable development and its component. Again, इस question की बात करें, it was very easy. Majority of people could have written. Your marks, whether you are getting again 30% marks or 60% marks, would depend upon whether you have written geographical components of sustainable development. And 3 components examiner would be always trying to find out in your answers. Besides, देखो equity सभी ने लिखा होगा, political participation, all those, they are definitely part and parcel of sustainable development. But whether you have written about environmental conservation, whether you have written about built development is what? For example, you must have read this in sustainable urbanization, हमारा एक topic है syllabus में. So there we talk about that the built development should be such that ultimately we are able to achieve sustainable development. So built development was another key component which should have been used. Then another important key component was resource management. Resource management. So these are what they are geographical component. बाकी component जितने भी लिखे they would definitely be there. But these are 3 very important geographical component which should have been written and explained. ठीक है? So this was question number 5. एक भी question ऐसा नहीं था. For some people time geography can be difficult to write. But again, if you are writing it like this using geographical concept, you can be very sure you will be getting very good marks in this part of the paper. Then ultimately last में अब इतना करने के बाद you can understand हमारे पास hardly 20 से 25 मिनट बचे होते. And this would be the time when I would do what? I would come back to question number 1. And question number 1 में बहुत उल्टे-पुल्टे questions हैं. It is very clear, but still एक question हमने discuss already कर लिया. 1C, how it should have been written, impact of ocean currents on air mass behavior. Already the knowledge you had, on the basis of that you had written very good answer. You should have written. Then next question which I would have definitely attempted, it was biological deserts, because this was one topic where I could have been able to write something which was based upon what we discussed in the class. So biological desert मुझे suppose करो अगर लिखना होता, first thing what I will do, in my answer I will be talking about few things. I will first talk about what is biological desert. That would be the first part of my answer. Then I will talk about where it is found and why it is found in those areas. That is basically what I have to talk about. So what when I am talking about, I will say that biological deserts are what? These are areas where biological productivity and diversity is found to be what? It is found to be almost absent or very very low. So such areas are biological desert. ये commonly कोई भी लिख सकता था, no problem in that. Now, if you were a guidance student, हमने क्लास में बात किया था Shelford concept of tolerance. You would have used that. So on an average, एक अपनी तरफ से डायग्राम बना सकता हूँ मैं. So for example, here we are talking about productivity, and here we are talking about environmental factors. And in general, what we find, normal range, suppose it is like this. Can I say that these would be the areas where we will find biological deserts to be located? I can use the same diagram to talk about these would be the locations where we will be generally, we will have tendency to find the biological deserts. And clearly what you have done, you have very beautifully used the same concept that you have learned in using or in writing this answer. Once I have explained what is biological desert, then I will move on. Class में हमने we talked about this one question which was give an account of major marine biotic provinces. So we talked about Neritic province, ठीक है? And in Neritic province we talked about bathypelagic, Neritic कह रहा हूँ, pelagic provinces. We talked about bathypelagic and we talked about abyss-pelagic provinces. And we said we used even in the class the term biological deserts. So I very well knew where these biological, one important biological desert. So I will describe this pelagic province, how it is a biological desert. In fact, you very well know that means, can I say on the basis of this, largest biome on earth, it is what? It is clearly the biological desert, which is this pelagic province. Then I will talk about where biological deserts are found on terrestrial environment or on the continent. You very well know this kind of condition exists where? Very low, both in terms of temperature and precipitation, it is polar. So polar realms or the polar biomes, clearly that is I will be talking about as another area which is near to the conditions of biological desert. I will describe why it is there, all those things. If I had, in fact, in optional classes, I have in my notes also you will find this statement that if we talk about tropical deserts, they are mistakenly considered as biological desert. They are not biological desert in the sense they are filled with abundance of life, although that life is specially adapted. So for example, you will find in desert, tropical deserts, you will find that there will be abundance of cold-blooded animals, lots of variety of cold-blooded animals would be found. Similarly, you will find even in terms of xerophytic vegetation, variety of xerophytic vegetation forms would be found in these areas. So they are mistakenly considered as biological desert. They are not. Once I have written this, I should be coming to conclusion. It is a 10 marker. I cannot write much. Can I also here introduce human influence, anthropogenic activities? What we are doing through our activities of pollution, etc., degradation, what we are doing? Can we say that we are converting many areas as biological deserts? Okay? Again, you can understand. Agar all these points you have written, why you will not get 6 marks? It is very high possibility you will be getting 6 marks and above in this question. And I haven't talked anything which you do not know. Only problem is application karna you do not know. You haven't practiced such type of questions which are difficult enough, which are making you to go outside your comfort zone. Then अगर मैं इन बाकी जो 3 क्वेश्चन बचे उसमें मुझे सबसे इजी कंसेप्ट लग रहा है माइक्रो सिंक एंड इट्स रेलेवेंस, क्योंकि देयर आर 2 पार्ट्स, वन इज माइक्रो सिंक एंड अदर इज इट्स रेलेवेंस. कम से कम रेलेवेंस वाले पार्ट को तो यू कुड हैव written so many points on that relevance part, although there is confusion exactly in what sense this micro sink has been used, because it would depend upon the examiner who has made the paper. In recent times it was in news as a result of microalgae and all those phenomena, but this concept of micro can be also related with microclimates, which is one of the aspects you study in applied climatology. So if you talk about from that sense, to be on the safer side, agar main likh raha hota, what I would have done, I would have talked about this concept of micro sink as a process as well as a spatial distribution. So there are major sinks which can be considered as oceans, or if you talk about forests, they would be what? They are major sinks. But there can also be what? Decentralized sinks. For example, urban, the social forestry programs that we are running, they are basically what? They can be considered as a micro sink at decentralized level. So there is a spatial concept of micro and there is a process concept of micro. So process concept is what? We are using microorganisms as a sink to ultimately introduce this process of carbon sequestration. So to be on the safer side, what I would have done, I would have definitely, when I was talking about what, I would just mention both of them. And soon, because my first part के बारे में sure नहीं हूँ, I will write less about this and I will write more about what? About the relevance. And clearly you can understand relevance, global warming, huge relevance, carbon dioxide concentration increase हो रहा है, you can all explain that. Then also there is relevance with respect to, one problem today we are finding is what? Can we say it is with respect to land use? There is pressure from all the sectors of land use. For example, net sown area, if you talk about, it needs to be increased because population is increasing. Similarly, if you talk about, we also need to have more land for urbanization, infrastructure development. We also need to have more land for other purposes. So again, what is there? Can we say that the process micro sink that we are talking about, use of water bodies, particularly as sink, can be very, very helpful when we are talking about this. Okay? So again, what I will do, I will focus on that part which I have more knowledge with, because it is high chance कि उसमें 2-3 number ज़्यादा मिल जाएगा, and in this question I might be able to achieve 2-3 number. If I am achieving, it is fine. ठीक है? Then I will come to question number 1 and A and B. इसमें से ज़्यादा easy मुझे लगता है pseudo volcanic, commonly थोड़ा easy होगा, because this topic is easier to break. Pseudo का मतलब clearly you can understand, something which looks like but it is not, and volcanic is volcanic. So I could have made, in fact I know number of students who have done the same thing, they have been able to write something about this topic. So you very well know what is pseudo volcanism now, अब तो पढ़ ही लिया होगा. So pseudo volcanic is basically what? It is those landforms which resemble volcanic structures but they have formed as a result of different processes. So definitely you must have studied about one very common such feature is crater. Now if you talk about craters can also be formed as a result of what? Meteorite impacts. Craters can also be formed as a result of other phenomena, like for example mining craters, very, very common, or other type of craters which, for example, if we are doing nuclear explosions, explosion craters, again they can be considered as a type of pseudo volcanic features. So you can mention about them. There can be other types, for example salt plugs is another type of pseudo volcanic feature which is mentioned, but we cannot claim this because we did not in the class. This was one thing. Even if my students are not getting even 0 marks, even they are getting 0 marks, मुझे कोई problem नहीं है, because I know that this is not the question which would determine their selection. It is rest of the questions which would determine their selection. How you are doing in rest of the questions. Same दूसरा क्वेश्चन की बात करें, distinguish between low energy coast and coral coast. Low energy coast and coral coast. So you can understand low energy coast, both are a kind of depositional coast. Similarity अगर हम इन दोनों की बात करें, you could have started it with this. Both of them represent what? Depositional coast. What is the basic difference between them? In one type, that is low energy coast, deposition is primarily from inorganic processes, while in coral type of coast the deposition is primarily from organic processes. organic processes. So that is the basic difference. Now you had to simply explain. इस बार तो नहीं करवाया था because I removed that question, but last year मैंने एक question करवाया था about aquatic biomes. So in that aquatic biomes we were talking about marine biomes. So we talked about various type of marine biomes. So if you talk about these low energy coasts, they are basically found along sheltered coast. So they can be present along estuaries, they can be present along or behind barrier islands, kind of sheltered coast. They would be what? They would be this type of coastline. So you will find that in these areas what you are finding? Slow deposition of the material or sediments is taking place. That would result in formation of mud flats. Lots of extensive mud flats would be found along these coasts. So we divide these coasts into this is your intertidal zone. So below this is subtidal zone, above this is intertidal zone, and above this is definitely the terrestrial zone. So if you talk about three zones, we can talk about which are found in these areas. This is the area which is commonly we find that lots of mud flats are present. Also what can be present? For example, in tropics, up till in these areas there can be your mangrove trees. It is very common to find mangrove trees present here. These trees or the vegetation which is found, it definitely would be having influence in creation of such coast, because it might be trapping the sediments and helping in the process of deposition. So that is basically low energy coast. Coral coast sabko pata hai. There you just have to do what? You have to explain the formation of coral coast. So coral coast you can understand, there can be one type of coral coast where we are finding what? Where we are finding there is presence of your fringing reef, which is not very far away from the coast. Then there is another type of coral coast where you know that this uplifted part is actually far away. So this is a type of barrier coast. And third type is atoll. So just you have to do what? You have to make the diagram and just tell that different type of such coastlines can be found. Okay? So that was how basically you had to attempt the paper. If we compare again, the choice type questions were easier, but problem is because of lack of practice and because of lack of this knowledge how to deal with the paper, you will be facing problems. अभी रुक जाओ, थोड़ा सा बता देता हूँ other questions के बारे में भी. एक question number 4 था, where discuss the concept of periglacial cycle as propounded by Peltier. So I remember, पता नहीं कौन सा 500 का बैच था, but there was one batch where one of the students asked me, कहाँ से वो सुन के आया था, I do not know, कि सर ये आप क्यों करवा रहे हैं? एरिड साइकिल में पढ़ा रहा था इन द क्लास, ये आप क्यों करवा रहे हैं? सिलेबस से ये हटा दिया गया. So earlier, before 2008, the syllabus which was there, in that it was mentioned fluvial cycle, arid cycle, karst cycle, by name these cycles were mentioned. So we find that UPSC was bound in that case to ask only from those cycles, and we find never ever they asked any other geomorphic cycle beyond these. Like you can say oceanography mein, they are mentioned Indian, Atlantic and Pacific Ocean. That means they are not asking about Arctic Ocean bottom topography. Same is the case here, but in 2008 when syllabus was changed, they ultimately introduced the term concept of geomorphic cycles and एक और टर्म साथ में जोड़ दिया, and landscape development. Now अब इसको समझना पड़ेगा, and what is the समझ? Clearly that any type of geomorphic cycle can now be asked. All of them are part of your syllabus. So I told him, मैंने नाम भी लिया इनफैक्ट, कि periglacial भी पूछ लेगा तो you should not be surprised. So again the same thing has happened. Periglacial they have asked. In fact अभी syllabus और बड़ा कर दिया उन्होंने. They have added the term landscape development, and you will find, if you read in geomorphology, you will find the non-cyclic theories which later developed as a reaction to the cyclic viewpoint. They found they did not use the term cycle because they were opposed to that. So to talk about the development of the landform, they use the term landscape development. That means if next year they are asking you about any non-cyclic geomorphologists or theory, you should not be surprised. Okay? So again, in that context, this periglacial cycle has been asked. That is the reason why I always ask students to read from Savinder Singh all the chapters related with erosion. If you look into the past 10 years paper, one of the solutions in the problem of geomorphology can be achieved from this fact if we just read them. And usme bhi you will find every year they are asking one landform. This year they asked a exceptional sa landform puch liya. That was pseudo volcanic landform. But normally what would happen, the landforms would be from the books. This was actually a kitab hai Thornbury ka. From there they एक chapter ही है pseudo volcanic. So probably teacher ने देखते देखते पूछ लिया. But majority of time the landforms they are asking, they would be coming from the same topics. So अगर कल को question आ जाता है, discuss the theories or discuss the complexities related with origin of pediment. Arid cycle में, arid वाले chapter में it is clearly given, number of viewpoints are given. You should not be surprised. या फिर discuss the development of cave and caverns. Karst cycle में you will find there is a elaborate description of these cave and caverns. So you should not be surprised. Or suppose question आता है, write a short note on patterned ground. So patterned ground कहाँ पर मिलता है? It is found in periglacial areas. So periglacial already पूछ चुका है. They can again surprise you by asking the landforms related with this area. So these type of questions would become what? They would become rule type. अगर उसमें से तुमने वो सारे landforms के short notes बना रखे, that is what you have to do. And again we will have to recognize whether the question is asking about cycle, sequential development, evolution. If these terms are used, clearly you will have to write it what? Youth, mature and old age. Otherwise, if you just have to describe characteristic of a type of landscape, then normally the other things that you study you can talk about. So periglacial was definitely, that is the reason they have asked you about periglacial, because it is part of your syllabus. You should be aware of this. Now, दूसरा question, climate, slope, gradient and rock structure influence the evolution of channels. Evolution was a concept we studied in channel morphology in our 500 class. We were talking about multiple channels and anastomosing channels. And we talked about this phenomena of evolution. We said that one of the most common phenomena through which these multi-branching channels are emerging, it is the phenomena of evolution. And if you remember or not, many of the students, evolution was what? It is basically a phenomena when flood is coming, an area becomes flooded. As a result, water spreads away from the channel into a newer area. So if earlier this water was just flowing through this channel, during the flood, what would happen? These areas are also flooded or inundated. So clearly what can happen? It can find some portions which are weaker zones or weaker structures. And through these weaker structures, what can happen? Clearly there can be a phenomena of more erosion. And if a channel or a gully has been formed, ultimately what would happen? As the flood levels go down, water would also be present here. And now this type of channel has become what? It has become multi-branching channel. We used in the class the concept of hydraulic geometry. Here the components you definitely had to use. So इसमें पूछ रहा है climate. You can understand. अगर मैं बोलूँ तो ये इस तरह का phenomena, you tell me, would be most common in which type of climates? Humid or arid? It would clearly be most common in humid type of climate, although it can even happen in arid type of climate during flash floods. But humid type of climate, it is most common. Now you also tell me one more thing. If I compare monsoon type climate and equatorial type climate. Where this phenomena would be more common? It would be monsoon type climate, because it is here we find that rainfall is concentrated in just 4 months. Thus runoff, if you talk about, it is very strong, and flooding, if you talk about, it is very strong in these type of areas. So definitely how climate is affecting, we can talk about that. This ये जो मैंने अभी बोला, we had learnt in morphogenetic regions. If you remember, हमने different type of climate and processes का बात किया था. So you could have used that knowledge. Then slope gradient, you can clearly understand. अगर हम slope gradient की बात करें, where this phenomena would be most common, where there is gentle gradient or steeper gradient. Where there is comparatively, we will be finding gentle gradient, because flooding, if you talk about, would be much more common in which areas? Where there is gentle gradient of the slope found. This is the reason you will find that in the lower reaches of the river, there is more multi-branching taking place. So if you talk about anastomosing channels, where they are maximum found, they are found in the lower reaches of the rivers. And clearly you can understand rock structure, you can explain how much important is the rock structure role in the formation of such or this phenomena of avulsion. So avulsion class में discuss किया था, although question number 4 was something like that which could not have been used. Discuss the perception, question number 4 see perception, attitude, value and emotion, PAVE theory of environmental management. Again this was one question which I did not discuss in the class, थोड़ा पास आया इसको discuss करने के, but did not go beyond that, so I cannot claim that. When we were talking about behavioral geography, so in behavioral geography का शुरुआत में we talked about Gilbert White and other peoples who introduced behavioralism in geography. First they introduced where? We talked about in physical geography, which was hazard geography they introduced. So this same phenomena, if you talk about, it was later, this process was expanded in environmental geography. It was outgrowing in the environmental geography. So definitely this led to development of this PAVE theory. So number of people were there which were involved. Saarinen was very important. O'Riordan was very important person who was involved in the development of this theory. Basically इस theory का basic concept क्या है? This theory basic concept comes when you are talking about environmental management. So whenever we talk about environmental management, one important aspect of environmental management is what? First stage is environmental impact assessment. And in environmental impact assessment, what we are doing? We are basically assessing also one important thing, what is the education levels, awareness level of the normal people with respect to these environmental factors or the environmental condition. So that is where this PAVE theory is all about. So PAVE theory में basically what this PAVE theory is talking about, PAVE you understand it is perception, attitude, values and emotions. पहले उसको थोड़ा describe करेंगे what are these. And for example अगर attitude की बात कर रहा होता तो there are certain kinds of attitude which are more important, like for example cognitive attitude which are more important with respect to the environment. When you are talking about values, certain part of the values are more environment. For example value related with environment. So describing this, ultimately you can understand this phenomena from this diagram. If we talk about this PAVE, so how it is affecting, there are two stakeholders. If we divide them into major stakeholders, two stakeholders, one is general public and second is environmental managers. Now what is happening as a result of this phenomena, perception, attitude, value, emotions, we find that some aspects are found, and one very important aspect is, first thing we can say, PAVE of general public. Then we are finding PAVE of environmental managers. Then another important thing what we are finding, understanding of the PAVE of general public by environmental managers. That is one component, how what environmental managers feel, people are feeling about. For example, several case studies are there, it was found that in US squirrels were damaging lots of electrical equipments, telephone equipments, but still there were no orders to ultimately eliminate them, because there was perception that people do not like killing of the squirrels. So what is the perception that environmental managers have that people have? That is one thing. Then there can be differences of PAVE, this perception, attitude, values and emotions in the general public. Same area, some people are supposed they are sowing rice or paddy or other primitive crops, while same area you will find people are going for cotton. Very commonly you will be finding this in the central Indian belt, even in the southern belt. Tribal people, they are sowing what? They are sowing different type of crops. So again it is what? It is based upon the perception, other aspects, attitude, values they have. So same land use is being used in a different manner. Then another aspect would be what? How there is difference in understanding of this PAVE of general public in the mind of the environmental managers. So all these ultimately combine to give what? They combine to combinedly result into behavior, and definitely this behavior ultimately results in environmental management. So clearly what we can say as a result of this PAVE theory, can we say that it emphasizes the role of public participation in formulation of environmental policies. Environmental policies would be what? They would be more successful, they can be more successfully implemented if we are able to understand all these aspects related with the perception, attitude, values, emotions of the public. So this would be the first part I will be trying to explain. Then I will talk about the shortcomings. And main shortcomings क्या होगा? Behavioral geography में जो हम पढ़ते हैं basically, is it easy to understand these aspects of people or environmental managers? It is very, very difficult. The methods that we have available, questionnaires, etc., they have been questioned. Because when you are giving a questionnaire to somebody कि अपना opinion बताओ, तो सबसे पहले हम क्या करते हैं? We become very conscious and we try to give very ideal type of opinion. So these type of aspects are what? They are based upon certain type of studies where their effectiveness has been questioned. But if you use observation method of people, again there are moral questions. Okay? So again there is very difficulty in using or developing the information which is required to ultimately use that in the theory perspective or policy formation. So again this is all the things that you have to write here. Okay? Clearly you can understand PAVE theory आ गया, अगले साल ERG theory आ जाएगा. So many type of theories are there. We cannot prepare each and everything. ठीक है, अभी आ गया तो I have got an idea. There are new avenue or new area they have opened. So clearly what I will do, मैं अपने क्लास में next time environmental geography में उसको incorporate कर लूँगा. But what I want to tell you is every year there would be some questions which would be what? Beyond your reach. Remember that it is not those questions which get you selected. Examination is what? It is like a chess. There would always be some moves you cannot make, while some moves would ultimately let you win. So that is basically what you have to do in the examination hall. Identify the areas. Be very, very confident, and this confidence would only come when you have that broadening of horizons, broadening of the scopes. Primary problem क्या हो रहा है? Primary problem is wherever you have done your classes, I am not concerned about that. General feeling is that you do not have knowledge about what is the scope of the topics, whatever be the reason. So you have to ultimately understand the scopes of the topic. You have to practice according to the scopes of the topic. If you are consolidated enough in the common things, we will find that we will be able to ultimately do well in the examination. एक और चीज, you cannot skip areas in the syllabus because it is very, very common now. We can see that easy questions can be from any area. For example, this was question number this year 2 का C, bottom topography of Pacific Ocean. कई लोग पढ़ के नहीं गए होंगे, and that was type of question where you know or you do not know. सो डू नॉट नो अगर हुआ तो अल्टीमेटली यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड मजबूरी में फिर वो उधर सीरो जेम के साथ जूझना पड़ेगा, दैट इज अनदर थिंग, ठीक है. सो अल्टीमेटली कवरेज शुड बी प्रॉपर एंड practice should be proper, consolidation should be proper, then only definitely we will be able to do well in the examination. That is what examination is demanding these days, and if you have that, if you can complete this, problem examination में नहीं आएगी. And you will find this, all these problems are coming where हर बार पेपर 1 में ही मार्क्स कम होते हैं. You tell me, पिछले 10 साल में अगर हम 1-2 सालों को छोड़ दें, there were 1 or 2 years, was there reduction in marks of paper 2? Paper 2 you will find consistently have been doing very well. Highest marks of paper 2 they can be compared with highest marks of one paper of other optionals. अगर ऐसा ही होता, यूपीएससी को इतना ही ज्योग्राफी वालों से परेशानी होती, तो why they are also not doing the same thing in paper 2? It is always these things are to be thought. So think about it. Why it is only happening in paper 1? Primary reason for that is paper 1 requires good conceptual knowledge and understanding, and that is what you, whatever be the reason, you haven't been trained enough, or you haven't been trained in that, and that is the reason these problems are arising. So again, I would say we will be dealing with these in 500. एक और मेरे पास एक और बात आया. Many people are saying कि सर के तो नोट्स बाहर मिल रहे हैं और अल्टीमेटली क्या करते हैं, टेस्ट सीरीज ज्वाइन कर लेते हैं, ठीक रहेगा. आई वुड से ठीक है, यू कैन डू दैट, बट डू दैट ओनली व्हेन यू आर वेरी कॉन्फिडेंट अबाउट योर कंटेंट. इफ यू आर वेरी कॉन्फिडेंट अबाउट योर कंटेंट, यू डायरेक्टली ज्वाइन द टेस्ट सीरीज, डेफिनेटली प्रैक्टिस होगा, फायदा होगा. बट इफ यू आर नॉट वेरी कॉन्फिडेंट अबाउट द कंटेंट, यू विल सफर इन द टेस्ट सीरीज, बिकॉज टेस्ट सीरीज इज एन एरिया, particularly modular test, where I test my students how much they are learning in the sessions. So उसके जो questions होते हैं, they are comparatively difficulty level थोड़ा अच्छा होता है. So it can happen that you can find lots of struggle in if you are just joining the test series. ठीक है. So that is what I can say. If you have any questions right now, you can ask. बहुत देर से मैं ही बोल रहा हूँ, क्या करो यार. It was like कम टाइम में we have to also cover the paper, and also we had to, I had to talk about the 500. तो क्या करें, बोलना ही पड़ता.
There are rules that are optional. So have you any information on the front?
Every year होता है ऐसा, ठीक है. So until it happens, we have to be prepared for both the worst and the best scenario. ठीक है. So you can never say कि optional would be removed and there is surety about that, because recently only UPSC ने change किया था syllabus. Normally we find that the change is actually taking place at an interval of about 10 years. For example, last time the syllabus was changed, before that it was somewhere 98, syllabus was changed. After that they changed the syllabus in 2008. So normally they take a period of time, after that they are changing. So until there is a very sure short information, we should not be basing our strategy on that. और कोई क्वेश्चन नहीं है?
Sir, the questions are generally of 20 marks, so you require any kind of framework so that we can maintain any kind of objectivity. And you will
Every topic has, he is asking that questions are 20 markers, 15 markers, 10 markers. Do they require any kind of framework which we can be using? General framework is, you know, that introduction, main body and conclusion. 3 parts of the answer are there. In 20 marker, what you can do is, it is important that you write all the 3 parts. In 15 markers, you have lesser space. So if you have time, you should write all the 3 parts. If you do not have time and you have lots of content, then you can eliminate any of these parts. 10 marker, I always say you start writing straight away, because this is an area where you cannot waste time. And if you are following my strategy, it would be that you will be writing the 10 markers in the last part, where you will already have lesser amount of time. So उसको जितना जल्दी लिख सकते हो, you should be writing. ठीक है. And other framework is, with every topic the framework would differ. For example, अगर मुझे सपोज करो कि फिजिकल ज्योग्राफी के टॉपिक्स के बारे में लिखना है, विच आर वेरी वेरी मैकेनिकल टाइप, तो जरूरी नहीं है कि मैं वहां पर कंक्लूजन लिखूं. बट जनरली व्हाट वुड हैपन व्हेन आई एम टॉकिंग अबाउट सम काइंड ऑफ अप्लाइड टॉपिक और सम काइंड ऑफ ह्यूमनिस्टिक टॉपिक, it becomes necessary that I write a conclusion. ठीक है? So it would vary with the type of questions. In 500 we will be doing so many type of questions. We will see what type of frameworks can be drawn. ठीक है? So let us split. Okay. If you have any queries, right now I am here. You can come to me. सबसे अच्छा स्ट्रेटजी है न्यूज़पेपर पढ़ते समय क्या करना है कि आपको दो बार टॉपिक को उठाओ, कि किस तरह का क्वेश्चन बन सकता है, वो क्वेश्चन को फिर उसका आंसर लिखना है. एंड व्हाइल यू आर राइटिंग आंसर यू थिंक अबाउट कौन सा ज्योग्राफी का कंसेप्ट है जो मैं यहाँ पर यूज कर सकता हूँ, किस तरह से मैं इसको ज्योग्राफी कर लूँ. दिस इज द ओनली प्रैक्टिस. देखो यही चीज़ है 500 में हम क्या करते हैं. दिस इज व्हाट वी ट्राई टू डू. बहुत सारे अब जैसे उन्होंने इस बार एक नया ट्रेंड डाला, एक नॉवेल्टी डाला है कि बहुत सारे नए इशू बेस्ड क्वेश्चन डाल दिए. तो अब की बार जब मैं करवाऊँगा तो मैं ज़्यादा इशू बेस्ड क्वेश्चन उठाऊँगा.
टॉपिक वाइज डिस्कस करेंगे.
उसमें तो शेड्यूल दिया होगा ना, यू हैव गॉट द शेड्यूल. इस टॉपिक वाइज
क्वेश्चन वाइज का डिस्कस होगा कि आप जैसे क्वेश्चन बताएंगे कि बाई टॉपिक यू विल डिस्कस द टॉपिक ऑफ दैट जो भी रिलेवेंट टॉपिक्स हैं.
डेफिनेटली रिलेवेंट टॉपिक, सभी टॉपिक से हम कुछ क्वेश्चन उठाते हैं नॉर्मली. प्रीवियस ईयर भी इंक्लूडेड होता है विच आई फील कि इस साल पूछे जाने का चांस ज़्यादा है. तो उस टाइप ऑफ क्वेश्चन में पिकअप करते हैं. बेसिक स्टेज पर ठीक है, बट अगर थोड़ा सा तुम्हें लगता है कि ठीक ठाक कवर करने के लिए जैसे कि अगर तुम जीएस की क्लासेस पढ़ाए उसको करना मुश्किल है. दिस इज द टाइम ज्योग्राफी में थोड़ा ज़्यादा टाइम दे सकते हो, क्योंकि फ्री के बाद प्रॉब्लम क्या होगा कि ज्योग्राफी के टाइम नहीं दे रहा है. उस समय एग्जामिनेशन करते हो एंड यू आर इन ट्रिमेंडस प्रेशर. इसीलिए मैं कह रहा हूँ कि जो टाइम है वो सबसे सूटेबल टाइम है.
Other books like Sandarshan Jiyawat along with your coaching, will you be suggesting which topics to read from that?
Definitely, I will be suggesting.
The vast syllabus
thing about vast syllabuses, you can have a general perception. मार्केट में भी मिल जाएगा, और तो मार्केट में मुझे एग्जैक्टली पता नहीं है कि मुझे सारे रिसेंट नोट्स अवेलेबल हैं, बट यहाँ पर सारे रिसेंट नोट्स बात करूँगा. तो उसमें तुम देखोगे कि नॉर्मली जो हमारी क्लास का कवरेज है इट इज़ मच वाइडर दैन अदर्स. मैं ज़्यादातर चीज़ें इंक्लूड करने की कोशिश करता हूँ. अगेन यू डिड नॉट ग्रास्प द मेन थिंग. हमने सबसे पहले क्या बोला, देयर वुड ऑलवेज बी सच टॉपिक्स. वी डू नॉट हैव टू रन बिहाइंड दोज टॉपिक्स. इफ माई नोट्स आर हेल्पिंग यू टू कवर ऑलमोस्ट 80% और 90% ऑफ योर नोट. Why you are concerned about 10%? और उसके लिए कितना मेरे को तो मैं बुक्स बता देता हूँ. ठीक है, if you just want to know the names of the books, वो भी ठीक है, मोटिवेशन बढ़ाने में अच्छा लगता है, रखा रहता है शेल्फ पे. बट प्रैक्टिकली अगर हम देखें तो इट इज़ बिकमिंग इम्पॉसिबल. ठीक है, और एक और चीज़ होता है कि एवरी ईयर व्हाट हैपन्स, जैसे चेंज हुआ, अभी मैं अपने जो ऑप्शनल कर रहा हूँ, अब मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ कि उस पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू से ऑप्शनल में एडिशन कर रहा हूँ. जहाँ पर भी सफिशिएंट एडिशन चाहिए वो करूँगा. ठीक है, तो अब जैसे अब पेन थ्योरी हो गया, ERG थ्योरी हो गया, ये सब मैं करवा दूँगा, बिकॉज आई नो कि उन्होंने एक नया एवेन्यू खोल दिया. तो वो बहुत सारी चीज़ें तुम्हें नोट्स में मिल जाएंगी जैसे जैसे क्लासेस होती हैं. व्हाट आई वांट फ्रॉम यू इज व्हाट वी डू इन द क्लास, यू शुड कंसोलिडेट वो एकदम इट शुड बी लाइक जबान पे, अगर वो नहीं कर पाता देन इट इज अ क्राइम.
So for the content part, apart from notes, as such for the 80% of the topic.
For apart from notes, there are 2 books good in the market. In fact, रूपा का किताब पढ़ सकते हो, रूपा मेड सिंपल, they are very good. But I would suggest कि उन books को तब पढ़ना once you have finished your syllabus. Because they are more helpful once you have finished your syllabus. Because वो books इस तरह का book है जहाँ पर बहुत concisely, technical manner में चीज़ों को लिखा हुआ है. But they give you an idea how geography should be written. उसी तरह से हमें जोग्राफी में प्रिसाइजली कंसाइज मैनर में लिखना है.
हर एक टॉपिक में जो लेक्चर होंगे या उसके बाद हमको नोट्स दिया जाएगा.
क्लास में हम इतना जॉटिंग कर लेते हैं यहाँ से पूछे 2-3 टॉपिक तो बढ़ी रहा है कि वही तुम अपना वो टेस्ट होगा.
सर क्लास में हम लोग जो क्वेश्चंस होंगे तो उसका पूरा आंसर फ्रेमवर्क पर
बहुत सारे क्वेश्चंस में आंसर्स देता हूँ, फ्रेमवर्क देता हूँ, पिछली बार दिया था. ठीक है, और भी कुछ क्वेश्चन प्रिपेयर हो गए देता हूँ. ठीक है, तो मिक्स रहेगा. इट विल बी सम क्वेश्चंस के लिए प्रिंटेड दूंगा, सम क्वेश्चंस के लिए हैंड रिटन दूंगा. लास्ट ईयर क्या कर रहा था कि प्रिंटेड भी देता था, हैंड रिटन भी देता था. इस बार मैं क्या कर रहा हूँ, हर जगह पर प्रिंटेड नहीं देता. जहाँ पर हैंड रिटन आंसर्स अवेलेबल है वहाँ पर हैंड रिटन दूंगा, और जहाँ पर नहीं अवेलेबल है वहाँ पर प्रिंटेड.
और उसके साथ आप डिस्कस करोगे ना सर, जिस तरह
बिल्कुल करूँगा. पूरे डिस्कशन से लोग मुझे परेशान हो जाते हैं, अभी परेशान हो गए मुझे. 4-5 घंटे कम से कम चलते हैं.
डिस्कशन का शेड्यूल नहीं दिया हुआ है.
क्यों नहीं शेड्यूल दिया हुआ है? उससे पहले दिया हुआ शेड्यूल.
टेस्ट दिया हुआ है ना,
ये मॉड्यूलर टेस्ट है एंड दिस इज द डिस्कशन शेड्यूल. तो 21st को फर्स्ट हमारा सेशन है, तो उसके बाद 24th को, देन 28th को, देन 1 दिसंबर को पहला टेस्ट है.
टेस्ट का डिस्कशन होगा या नहीं?
टेस्ट के डिस्कशन का शेड्यूल नहीं दिया है. टेस्ट के डिस्कशन का शेड्यूल बच्चों से बात करके डिसाइड करता हूँ. बच्चों का थोड़ा सा फायदा कि इतना थोड़ा सा मेरे को एक्सटेंशन दे दो, मैं नहीं लिख पाया हूँ, तैयारी नहीं हो पाई है. तो विद इन 1 वीक कोशिश करते हैं.
सो विद इन डिस्कशन इवैल्यूएशन होता है, आंसर राइटिंग करके लाएंगे तो
देखो मैं तुम्हें एकदम साफ इस चीज़ को बताता हूँ. इवैल्यूएशन का क्या सीन है कि क्लियरली यू कैन अंडरस्टैंड सो मेनी कॉपीज आ गए, तो मैं सारे इवैल्यूएट नहीं करता. ठीक है, बट मैं सबको बोलता हूँ कि इफ़ यू वांट यू ब्रिंग योर कॉपी टू मी एंड गेट इट इवैल्यूएटेड बाय मी. आफ्टर यू गेट योर कॉपी, वो मुझे ला करके दिखा दो, मैं एक बार देख लूँगा एंड आई विल टेल यू व्हाट यू नीड टू इम्प्रूव. ठीक है, आई विल टेल दिस इवन क्लास में भी बोलूँगा. आई विल सी दैट केवल 10% ऑफ स्टूडेंट्स आर डूइंग, और मैं कितना भी कोशिश करूँ ये चेंज है, तो मेरे लिए बर्डन नहीं है. सो इफ़ यू विल बी इंटरेस्टेड ना, वी विल शो योर कॉपी. ठीक है
सर, वो मैंने नोट्स पढ़ लिए थे 2 बार, और उसके शॉर्ट नोट्स बनाने का एक्चुअली, और इसमें कोई सप्लीमेंट कोई सोर्स जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी की और बुक से पढ़ने का?
अगर अब तो मुझे लगता है कि तुम बहुत ज़्यादा पढ़ चुके जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी, देन उठा करके एक बार थॉर्नबरी पढ़ रहा हूँ. ठीक है, थॉर्नबरी पढ़ रहा हूँ अगर तुम्हें लगता है. लेकिन मुझे लगता है कि वो बुक के साथ प्रॉब्लम क्या है कि टेक्निकल है. ठीक है, और एक होता है ना कि हर चीज़ का हमें कॉस्ट बेनिफिट एनालिसिस करना है कि हम एक्चुअली कितना टाइम डिवोट कर रहे हैं, उसका हमें कितना फ़ायदा है. तो अगर मैं बोलूँ तो उसका बहुत ज़्यादा फ़ायदा नहीं है. इस बार जिन्होंने जैसे पढ़ लिया होगा तो उसमें एक चैप्टर दिया हुआ स्यूडो वॉल्केनिज्म, तो वो हो गया. लेकिन उसमें से ज़्यादातर चीज़ें मैं करवाता हूँ. मैंने आज तक स्यूडो वॉल्केनिज्म नहीं करवाया क्योंकि इस तरह का अटपटा क्वेश्चन जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी में अभी तक नहीं पूछता था. किसी न किसी टॉपिक से रिलेटेड पूछता. लेकिन अब स्यूडो वॉल्केनिज्म में मैं किसी भी प्रोसेस में जियोमॉर्फोलॉजिकल जो प्रोसेस नॉर्मली पढ़ते हैं उसमें मैं पुट नहीं कर सकता. ठीक है, बिल्कुल वो अलग तरह का फिनोमेना है. इसलिए मैं उसको नॉर्मलाइजेशन में बहुत सारा अप्लाइड जियोमॉर्फोलॉजी में मैं बहुत सारी जो चीज़ें कराता हूँ वो उसी बुक से कराता हूँ. बहुत सारे जो टॉपिक्स हैं वो मैं उसी बुक से कराता हूँ. तो जो काम की चीज़ें हैं वो मैं करवाता हूँ. ठीक है, मेरे नोट्स में भी मिल जाएगा.